So I think it's 6:02 by my clock, so we should probably get started. I presume that the mayor is going to be joining us, but I'll go ahead and start. So I'd like to convene our special city council meeting for Tuesday, May 10th,
Recording in progress.
Let me start again because the recording just started. Welcome to everyone to the special city council meeting of Tuesday, May 10th, 2022. And I see the mayor is here, so I shall turn over the baton to him.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Bial. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. Just got back from the police memorial, which was a really positive experience under not so positive circumstances. But Marina Police Department did a great job setting it up, organizing it, emceeing it, and the fire department had their fire truck there as a windbreak and a sort of stage for everything. So it was really well represented and run by the Marina Police Department fire to some extent. But it's a good memorial, and it was nice to be there. All right, so thank you, Mayor Briala, for calling us to order. And have we had the roll call vote yet?
No.
Can we do that, please, Lane or Matt or Guido?
Well, have Guido handle that.
Sure, that's fine. I can do it. Mayor Delgado.
Here.
Councilmember Berkeley. Vice Mayor Biala.
Here.
Councilmember Burnett.
Here.
Councilmember Dirksen.
I'm here.
Okay, we have quorum.
All right. Thank you, Guido. Would someone like to volunteer to lead us in the pledge after a moment of silence? All right. Councilmember Christina Medina Dirksen, thank you. We have a moment of silence and then the pledge led by Christina.
Please rise and put your hands over your heart. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Councilmember Medina Dirksen. So we're going to have a study session tonight regarding the Dunes Development Project, specifically compensation and mitigation for trees illegally removed and changing policies and procedures to ensure that we have compliance with tree removal regulations. Guido, do you want to take it from here or Lane?
Sure, I can take it from here. Can you hear me, Mayor?
Yes, loud and clear. Thanks.
Okay. So we're here tonight just to talk about the Dunes development. Most of this is background that people know, but just so that we're all on the same page. This is the overall development. These are the various phases. So tonight, when people are referencing phases, if you need me to bring this map up, I will bring it up. It does help for people who are new, like me. It helps just to have this map because people reference the phases. So it's helpful just to have it as background. Just by way of background, Fort Ord closed in 1994. The base reuse plan was adopted in 97. From 2001 to 2005, the land was transferred to the city of Marina. And in 2005, the city council did adopt a resolution approving the specific plan and the final EIR. In terms of the specific plan, it is a pretty voluminous document. It's actually probably one of the more detailed specific plans that I've worked with. I understand from Karen Tiedemann that there were actually 72 public hearings about it. So it's actually a pretty good document to use as staff. There are very detailed standards as they relate to trees. I won't read what's on the screen, but in general, there is a 2-to-1 replacement ratio, and the eucalyptus trees are not to be recorded and therefore not to be replaced. I spent quite a bit of time the last month going through the administrative record As you can see on the screen, there's been quite a bit of activity at the Planning Commission level for the various phases of the project. And the focus of tonight is going to be on a series of retreats. And if the council can see where I have the blue, the arrow pointed, this was the area of the trees that were removed without the benefit of a permit. And just blown up further, these were the trees that were removed. I understand from the applicant this was done because there was an asbestos-laden pipe below these trees, and they were doing it at the behest of the water district.
Excuse me, Guido.
Yes.
We had a meeting with Marina Coast Water District, our city manager, Kathy Bial, and I, a public meeting, a joint meeting. It happens once every other month. And we talked about this, and they said that they did not give any direction for that pipe to be removed, only that they marked on a map that it was there and it might need to come out, but that they don't take responsibility for giving any direction to move that pipe. And they said if they were asked for alternatives, there were alternatives to leave the pipe in place, cut it off at both ends, leave it in, fill it in. There are different ways to deal with pipes that are no longer needed. They don't necessarily have to come out, especially if they have important assets above them.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification, Mayor. I appreciate that. So one of the questions that the council asked in March when they asked for this meeting was, what are the potential penalties? So there's a wide range of penalties. There is a 6-to-1 replacement ratio for the penalty for the removal of the trees. The council retains the authority to make this into a code enforcement matter and refer this through administrative citations and administrative hearings to administrative hearing officer. And there is the provision to find the applicant in default of the agreements that they've signed with the city. Part of my role as a director is when there is issues that come up to try to do an after action review. And in every crisis, there is an opportunity to do things better. In my review of the city's policies and procedures and speaking with Denise Duffy and Associates, the assigned arborist and various staff members, I did notice, unlike other cities, so there were a lot of people involved in this permit. When I spoke with multiple actors, there was the arborist, there was the applicant, there was a lot of work done at the Planning Commission level. But one thing that I did notice is, and one thing I will be asking to moving forward, is we really need the planners to be stamping the plans for most permits in the city as a final kind of check. Even on grading permits, there was a little bit of a disconnect in terms of if you're moving dirt, the city planners who are assigned to the tree removal permit really should be involved in making sure that only the trees that are to be removed are removed, and the ones that are protected are protected. So there is an attached standard operating procedure that I've prepared, and I've summarized it here, just basically saying that we do need the planners to step up and to stamp plans for more projects, even for the grading, building, and demo permits. And we will be asking the applicant to insert that in the sheet of the plans moving forward and having the planners stamp that sheet of the plans. And so tonight, I understand from the city manager, for study sessions, we're not really taking formal action. We're really here just to review the material. And then if there is formal action, we would have to take that back to another meeting. So that concludes my initial presentation. I'm glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Guido. Just to start off, can you go to your last slide that you just had up? Did your comment at the end mean that we're not going to do number 2? We're only going to do number 1?
I would defer to the city manager on that. I understand that we're here really just to listen to the council. And then if we want to take formal action, we would have to do that at another meeting. That's my understanding.
And I assume we're gonna have plenty of public comment too. But go ahead, City Manager Lane Long.
Yes, yeah, we definitely, if council wants to have some discussion regarding these issues, absolutely. We'll take a lot of discussion, a lot of feedback. And then if we wanted to schedule something for a future meeting for possible action, we can definitely do that. But yeah, the intent is to have some discussion regarding these issues. And if there's discussion regarding penalties, we definitely want to hear that and get feedback on those.
Okay, so Lane, we're really not going to do number 2 the way it's written. Is that correct?
Correct. We're not going to be adopting anything. But if the council wants to do that, we'll schedule that for another meeting.
Okay, so we can discuss penalties tonight. Are there recommended penalties?
Guido can go over that, please.
Yeah, so in the municipal code and the specific plan, there is a wide range of penalties the city council can adopt. And so that's really up for discussion today. But it's more likely probably going with the 6-to-1 replacement ratio as the penalty. But that obviously counts. That obviously is a council decision. That's not my decision to make. So.
All right, Guido. So although not written, are you saying that verbally staff recommendation is the 6-to-1 replacement ratio?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make a couple clarifications before we go to Mayor Pro Tem Biala, and then council member, I think, is with us. All council members are with us. So secondly, we'll go to council member Lisa Berkeley. Go ahead, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to, again, clarify that process that you just brought up, because in the staff packet where they have questions and then answers, these pages aren't numbered, but this was on the document that looks like it's a memorandum from Guido Persicone. I'm sorry if I pronounce it wrong, from Guido to the city council. And on number 6, it says that it should be pointed out that the Planning Commission has not provided its input on the tree removal permit as of yet. So it would be premature of the city council to provide policy direction on this matter. So I just want to, find out if we go ahead, is this something that we shouldn't be doing based on what's written here?
So the only thing I was trying to say in the memo was that the phase 3 tree removal permit has not been reviewed by the Planning Commission, but we're not really here to focus on that tonight. We're really here to focus on those row of trees that were removed without permits, and what is the what occurred, what's the after action review, and what are the potential remedies to ameliorate that. So that's certainly within the realm of the council tonight. But the phase 3 tree removal, we really should let the Planning Commission weigh in on that before it potentially, if there is an appeal or not, to wait for that. So.
Okay. And that probably then applies to any discussion of mitigation trees, maybe being withheld until phase 3, anything like that. We should not be discussing anything that has to do with phase 3.
That this really is a study session. In terms of making a formal recommendation, we would probably shy away from that. But to the applicant's credit, they have identified additional trees that could be saved within phase 3. That is attachment 3 to the report. And so that could be a discussion point, but obviously not formal direction, because that's not the focus of the study session.
Okay, thank you. That's just for the clarification of this process. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Let's go to Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Thank you. Actually, Kathy got to one of my questions. The other question is a point of clarification also in the staff report. It's in the attachment 2, and it is, let's see, page, oh goodness. It talks about the 24, hold on one second, the 24-inch think it's, hold on, I'm sorry, I had it up and then I just lost it a second ago. Okay, while I'm looking for this, the clarification, I am also curious if we've discussed, because I didn't see it, mitigation of, with trees of a certain size, that the trees that would be replaced would be of a certain size. Did I, and this is part of what I was asking. Gosh, I can't find it. Hold on one second. Let me make this screen bigger because maybe you can see it. Okay, yes, wait, hold on, right there. Second line, the minimum size of tree selection is 15-gallon minimum 24-inch box trees. Is this, I wasn't clear if this is for replacement or for removal.
That language is straight from the specific plan. I believe 15-gallon is the preferred.
Of what would be put in the 6-to-1 ratio?
Right.
Okay.
And the 24-inch box is for, special areas within the specific plan.
Okay. Okay, that was really, because I only had 2 questions. Kathy asked one and this was my second, so I'm good for now. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Councilmember David Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just trying to also get clear as to the purpose of tonight's meeting and the outcomes we're all looking forward to. So essentially, we've had a report of a tree removal verification by staff, and then the plaintiff, the developer, has admitted that these trees were moved inappropriately or without permit, and that it was an accident. This came to a city council meeting. We had a minor discussion at a council meeting, and then asked staff to put on a future meeting agenda a discussion of the incident and possible remediations, mitigations, penalties. Is that kind of where we are, or why we're here?
That is an excellent summary of what we're doing.
Yes,
Okay.
the only other thing I would add to that is council also directed that we have the public meeting, which we held before that, so that we could have input from that public meeting, which Guido really hasn't covered that yet, and he may want to cover some of the input from that public
Sure.
meeting.
Sure,
Oh,
I
yes,
can absolutely.
please. I would, yes, I would love to hear that.
So I will, let me just pull up my,
And Mr. Mayor, I would like a follow-up following Guido's presentation. Thank you.
yeah, so we had a meeting on May 2nd. It was a very productive, very fruitful meeting. Attachment 3 to the staff report actually was shared with the community at that meeting, the additional trees that potentially could be saved within phase 3. The applicant did agree to do a site visit with concerned citizens for phase 3 and phase 4 to really be able to match up the map that's in your staff report with the potential trees that could be saved and some other opportunities. And most importantly, applicant did own up to the mistake and did pledge to work with the city to hopefully ensure this doesn't happen again. And I thought that was a really important part of the meeting, that that there was some ownership of the issue. So that's basically what happened. It happened inside the Dunes applicant trailer, and we had a pretty, I don't know, we had about 20 people in a very tiny room. So it was a very cozy meeting. So.
Let me go into a couple other things that we talked about at the meeting that I think may help this discussion. The Dunes kind of talked about the existing, as Guido mentioned, the phase 2 west, and that there are some existing trees that were approved for removal in phase 2 west, that they'd be willing to work with us on potentially saving some of those trees. They've said not all of them, but they kind of marked out certain trees that they would be interested in saving, and so those are discussions I think that we wanted to have with the council, because those are already approved for removal, and they've kind of put that out there that that may be something they're willing to kind of help mitigate some of the impacts to this. We also talked about with phase 3, and even though, as Guido mentioned, the phase 3 tree removal really needs to go through the appropriate process, and we aren't there yet, but obviously phase 3 is a part of the mitigation that we're looking at. So I still think while we can have some discussion about that, we'll try not to influence the normal tree removal process as it goes through the planning commission. But we did talk about the grading of phase 3, the existing lots that are already there, the existing infrastructure that's already there, the existing trees that are there, and what the Dunes is planning for removal, which really is pretty much most of the trees in the phase 3 areas where the lots are going to be and where the road and other infrastructure is going to be, because of the grading and other things. That most of those trees they will be proposing to be removed. What we asked the public that was there at the meeting was knowing that is what the Dunes will be doing, and what they believe through the development agreements they're entitled to develop those lots and put in the infrastructure. We asked the public to go and look at some of those trees or the trees in that area, and if there were some really key landmark trees, to let us know so that we can start having those internal discussions with the Dunes group as the tree removal process moves forward, to see if there's some adjustments we can look at regarding lots or road infrastructure or sidewalks or other things that are going in. So we asked the public to get engaged with that and to give us that feedback, which I think will be important, critical feedback to us. We talked about how the linear park that will be part of the phase 3 development, that presents a lot of opportunity for potentially preserving trees. So that's a 70-foot wide park that starts at the roundabout and goes all the way to the southern end of the phase 3 development. And so we talked about if there are trees in that part of that plan would be a good opportunity to preserve those trees. We also talked about the option of other trees that they're proposing to remove in phase 3, that some of the healthy ones and the really good ones, that maybe we can, instead of removing those or replacing those on the 2-to-1 mitigation, actually remove those really good ones and replant them in the linear park or potentially other areas. And so that was an option that we talked about. And I'm trying to think the other options. I think that was most of the options, maybe when the public speaks, but I think those are the highlighted ones of our best opportunities are the linear park, that we want to try to preserve those trees, replant some of the trees if we can, do the same mitigation. The penalties by the code are 6-to-1. And so it's not necessarily that is all that we're recommending from the staff end, but according to our adopted policies, which are codified in our development agreements, that is what they're required to do is the 6-to-1 mitigation. But outside that, we certainly want to have some discussions and get some feedback on expectations from the council and the public on different ways that we can potentially offset those removals, and what are the best ways that we can have the most advantage to our community moving forward, given that, and potentially with phase 3 coming online.
Thank you. So my follow-up question then is, I'll propose that tonight's meeting, 2 possible outcomes or 2 areas I would like to see for discussion.
So David, let's check in a minute, David. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but normally we have council questions, and That's all. So do we want to
Well,
change
I
that?
didn't finish my questioning. I was interrupted, and then Guido gave his presentation, and I asked to have a follow-up following his presentation.
So we're going to be in question mode, then you're not asking to change our normal approach.
No, I just want to make a proposal for tonight.
But making a proposal is not asking a question. That's why I'm not sure if we should.
Okay,
change our
okay, then I'm going to ask a question of, could we possibly consider for tonight's meeting 2 outcomes? One of them is to determine from the incident a proper resolution, that is penalties, mitigations, and secondly, to conduct the public hearing on the 3rd phase and what we would like to see. So we actually have 2 questions that we'd want to resolve. I'd like to have a discussion about the incident itself and remedies and mitigations for that, penalties and mitigations for that. And then a second question is about the phase 3. Otherwise, it's going to get, I think, colluded together, and we might not get a clear distinction as to what do we want to see going forward.
All right, Lane or Guido, can you answer that question?
Sure, yeah. I believe, like I said, from the city manager, I understood that you're to give some guidance today, and then we would come back with a formal resolution with whatever the council decides in terms of the penalty. And then in terms of phase 3, I think the additional trees the applicant is trying to save, we can definitely take that under advisement. And so when the planning commission looks at it, that will definitely part of the administrative record. Yeah, so both of those seem reasonable to me as a staff member. So
Okay, thank you. That was it, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, David. I really like David's approach, trying as much as possible, though there is some overlap, to do this. So let's do it the way that David is suggesting. And let's have some focus right now on questions relating to the loss of the trees that were already cut without permit before we get too much more discussion on phase 3, which is the future. And then we can turn it over to the public and they'll just get one bite at the apple to talk about both of those pieces. But let me jump in here because I know that Councilmember Medina, Dirksen, and Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala just put their hands up. But I'm going to start off to try to get us on the track with questions the way I understood David is asking us to kind of separate this a little bit. So Guido, can you go back to your slide presentation where you had the SOP that was the draft, I believe, that you recently produced?
sure.
So now we're focusing on the past, not yet looking ahead. Guido, if this was our standard operating procedure, if it was in place today, even though it's not yet, would it have had any effect on what happened to those 7 trees that were without permit removed?
Yes and no. So obviously the applicant did what they did without a permit. So the answer overall would be no. But in my review of the entire department and speaking with multiple staff members, there has been a disconnect that there's been a lot of work done at the planning commission level. And the applicant has a really good arborist, Patrick, who's working in concert with the city. But the disconnect is on the building side of the house with the grading plans and the demo plans. The planners have not been as roped into that as much as possible. And in this instance, there was actually dirt being moved, and it wasn't entirely clear who was taking full responsibility for protecting the trees on the site. So this is just an additional layer of protection moving forward to make the city planners be involved in even the grading permits, which I understand now they are not, to make sure that if basically anything's going on in the site, that there's another pair of eyes moving forward on these plans. So it's a yes and no answer. So
Okay. So if anybody takes a piece of heavy equipment in without permit and damages trees, this SOP is not relevant. Is that correct?
yes and no, because the planners are not involved with the grading permits right now. So if you try to move a heavy piece of equipment, if there's better connection between public works and planning, we can be more involved and to make sure that, hey, there's a piece of equipment being moved in, why and what's going on, and then we can better get roped into the process.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Can you go to the staff report where it talks about the community meeting and show
Sure.
us that?
Sure.
So everyone can kind of stay on the same page as best as possible. So on May 2nd, 2022, there was a community meeting. The applicant apologized for inadvertently removing trees. Now, is this inadvertently or was it intentional that these trees were taken down?
It's not really my position as a staff member to,
But if someone with a bulldozer decides to take down a tree, that's not like, oops, we were taking down the building and we backed into a tree. That would be inadvertent. This was something, am I correct, that was done on purpose without authorization?
I don't want to disparage the applicant. I would just,
We're looking for the truth. We're not
Yeah,
saying that the answer is
yeah,
going to disparage anyone, but the word inadvertent to me means it was an accident. We didn't see the tree. We accidentally knocked it over. We harmed it. But if 7 trees were on purpose by the bulldozer operator, knocked over and removed and cut up into pieces, I'm questioning if inadvertent is the right word. Is there a word that's accurate for what happened?
Yeah, I think it depends on, so he's referring back here to MCP. So MCP did not direct the subcontractor to remove all the trees. And I think that's pretty much established. What they had told the contractor was they'd given him the map of the area of the trees to remove. And so there's no direction from MCP to remove all the trees. And so the question is, the subcontractor removed the trees, obviously
Wait.
deliberately.
Okay, that's what so it was, they were deliberately removed without a permit. And who takes responsibility for that is a different issue, but it wasn't an accident that they were removed. Right?
Correct. The subcontractor made a decision to deliberately remove all the trees along there.
It wasn't like an incidental take permit where they needed to get to a house and they had to take down some trees to do what they had to do. They were specifically going after the trees without having gone through the permit process. Okay. Now, can you go to the penalty slide where you had 3 options in your presentation tonight?
Sure.
Talked about 6-1 and
Sure.
default and something else, which I can't remember at the moment. So you showed us that the existing remedy or penalty in the specific plan or ordinance is 6-1 replacement ratio. And that's why, is that why you're recommending it? Because that's basically the letter of our law.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, when we say 15-inch box trees, how tall are these trees approximately? Are they less than 10 feet tall?
That I don't know, Mr. Mayor, off the top of my head. I'd have to.
Can anyone on staff or developer tell us approximately the height of replacement trees typically?
I just asked that.
What was the answer?
He said that it was in like the 24 inch, that was the reference in the attachment.
Right, it's a 24-inch box. That's the diameter of the box. I'm wondering how tall typically.
Oh, my
is the tree.
apologies. I misread it. Sorry. I thought the trees were about 2 feet. Sorry.
So a 24-inch box is pretty big. You can almost wrap your hands around it and be tough. But how tall is a typical tree? If we get a 6-1.
Just pulling it up now. So what does it do? Anywhere from 8 to 12 feet tall.
Great. Okay, so 8 to 12. Let's call it a 10-foot tall tree.
Okay.
So we take down, in this case, these behemoths, these matriarchs, these 80 to 100-year-old trees that are, 40 feet tall, and we get, or taller, and almost as wide. And we get 6 10-foot tall trees. They may take, how long would they take? About 80, trying to answer the question, would they take about the same amount of time as the previous ones to get that large? Would they take decades to get large?
That's a fair assumption. So
And so is that why that some people are dissatisfied with the 6-to-1 ratio? Because is it because you're replacing a big tree with little trees?
that's a fair assumption, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Now that 3 options that had the notice of default, and can you go back to that slide that had the 3
Sure.
options?
Sure.
So tell us about code enforcement hearings. I've never heard about these. So how does this work? What's the purpose of having them, and what are the possible outcomes of such hearings?
So the purpose of this slide was when the city council met in March, they asked staff to give them the wide range of penalty options. The first one probably was what people are more familiar with, but any violation of the municipal code can be declared a public nuisance. There is a whole section of the municipal code here related to administrative citations, administrative hearings. The city council would declare this a nuisance. We would have to appear before a third party administrative hearing officer, and that would begin a more detailed code enforcement process to potentially have a wide range of various code enforcement options. So,
Okay. And if we thought these trees were extremely valuable that were removed, would that be one reason why we might take it in this direction? Or is that not a relevant reason, a good reason?
I mean, that's a possibility. It's just these code enforcement hearings are typically for more building code or pretty egregious health code safety violation issues. But yeah, the city council could take that path if they choose.
Okay. So if we thought that a violation of our permitting process resulted in an egregious removal of valuable assets, we could theoretically go that direction.
Sure. The municipal code here is written pretty broadly in terms of things being defined as a nuisance. So.
Okay. Now, does the notice of default come out of those hearings, or is that a separate beast?
That's a totally separate beast, and I'd have to defer to the city manager and city attorney on that in terms of the development agreements and the operating agreements. That's a little bit out of my jurisdiction, if you want to call it. So.
All right, City Manager Lane Long, can you speak to this just to explain to the council and the public and the developers if they need to know what this is all about?
Our development agreement provides for ultimately a default if the terms and conditions of the development agreement are not met. Whether or not the removal of 6 trees that are not permitted could qualify for default, I'm not positive that it would. And it would certainly become a legal issue at that point. So I think if there is any interest or discussion in looking at that, I think we just need from direction from the council to look at that, and then we'd have our legal counsel report to the council in closed session on the legality of that and if that is really feasible. So we just put that as an option that that any violation of the terms and conditions ultimately could be a default. Whether or not this would really qualify may be a stretch, but it's something that you can get some legal advice if you wanted to pursue it.
Okay, I appreciate you giving us the sideboards of what is possible. Not that we're going to go to that direction, but we need to learn this because I don't know it. This is my first time through this kind of a circumstance. You're not a lawyer, I know, Lane, but is it possible that being a second time where there were multiple valuable trees removed, could result in the terms of our agreement not being met? Or is it that first time is over, it's behind us, and we look at this de novo, this is a one-time deal, and we don't refer to what happened in the past?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to say, but it was definitely your earlier comments. We wanted at least to make you aware that potentially could could be an option, a sideboard. We just want to make you aware that that is there. But if there is an interest, I think you really need to get a lot more input from from our city attorney on whether or not that's even a possibility.
All right. So is it reasonable that we would take the approach? We're not looking for penalties. We're not looking to disparage anyone, but that we're looking in a general sense for some tree justice, justice for the community because we've had some loss, justice to the trees that are remaining, and trying to get some kind of compensation that makes the most sense to us. If 6-1 with little trees doesn't find the justice that the public or the council wants, is that what we're really after? Is a solution to the problem, not to penalize people or to disparage anyone?
Yes, and I think that really was our focus of the meeting with the public. It was clearly those trees they cut down are irreplaceable. Those large diameter, large trees, we're never going to be able to replace that. So then the question is, what are the solutions to try to mitigate those impacts of seeing if we can recover that, recoup for that, mitigate that elsewhere for something that was really, you can't replace those once they're cut down.
Okay, and this is where we get, I think, isn't it true, in the overlap? Because if we talk about replacing these trees, that gets to David's point, that is phase 1. But if we talk about not cutting down trees in phase 3 to accommodate these, then that's the overlap. It's going to be hard but we're trying our best. So my last question before we turn it over to Councilmember Dirksen and Mayor Pro Tem Biala is the trees that were unauthorized cut, were they in phase 2 or phase 3?
They were in phase 3, the unauthorized ones.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. So let's turn it over to Christina Medina Dirksen. Thank you very much, Lane and Guido.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a question. While I have studied law, I'm not a lawyer, but I just am wondering about this process. City manager should not, before we start talking policy, have a chance to hear from the developers or the offending party. I feel like, I don't want to make a comment. I think you can read into what I'm trying to say. Are we not putting the cart before the horse while we talk about the mitigation without actually hearing the other side of what occurred?
Yeah, I think from our process point of view, we're in the clarifying questions from the council. And then after that, we would typically open up for comment, typically first go to the developers or the offending party if they had their comments. And then after that, we go to the public and then come back to the council.
Okay, I will not make a comment on that, but my point being made that should it not be before we talk policy and damages?
Christina, we're in the question phase. Do you
Next
have a
question is, had we studied the health of those trees?
The city hadn't, but I believe that the Dunes has already hired Denise Stuffing Associates that did an inventory of all those trees. And so I think there is a report. It's in draft form, and so it's not available to the public, but I believe that the Dunes or Denise Stuffing Associates did complete a survey and analysis of the condition of every tree in phase 3, including those that were removed that weren't permitted.
Is it possible to get some of those findings so we understand their condition as it related to their sustainability / viability?
Yeah. Lane, so one of the requests from the community was to put the phase 3 report up on the web, and I did that as of April 14th. And it's under the Dunes development project. So it's actually up on the city website right now.
Do you have an overall, sort of me looking up right now, answer to my question in terms of if we knew how many were viable?
I'd have to look at the arborist report. So.
I'd like to keep that question out there. The next question I had, and this is one that I had prior when we started these discussions about this unfortunate, very unfortunate incident, was had it been established if the removal of the pipes was possible with keeping the root structures intact / keeping the trees, assuming that they were healthy, intact, and then adding on to that if, and also had the pipes been determined whether or not there was hazardous materials such as asbestos in them.
The mayor's spoken on that. He gave his opinion. The applicant has a different perspective, so that might be a better question to ask of the applicant.
Okay, I think, is it not a matter to determine, is that a question? Would we be able to figure out the facts on that? Would there be a factual determination possible?
Sure, we can certainly do a little bit more digging, but Lane was going to comment. So.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Lynn.
the problem with that was they put in an initial application, and had we gone through our application process, we would have answered a bunch of your questions. That process would have looked at the asbestos pipe. Did it need to be removed? And if not, what are the options that are out there? So a lot of your questions, we never got through our process to be able to really answer them.
Lane, to Guido's point that it was my opinion when I was trying to relate what we heard in a public meeting from MCWD, can you summarize what we were told in that public meeting?
Yes. So MCWD, there are other options with that pipe, and yes, it did have asbestos, and one option is to remove all the pipe, and if they removed it, they'd want to remove it in intact segments so you don't break up the asbestos and the other contaminants. But there are other options available to where they could seal it off and do protections that would mitigate the impacts of the asbestos. So they said there are other options potentially available had we gone through that process and evaluated them. We just never had the opportunity.
Did they include the options that they mentioned, kind of off the top of their head? It could be capped at the ends, it could be filled in, it could left in place. It all depends on circumstances that they didn't have, they didn't, like us, they had not gone through those options.
Yes, that's correct.
So they had not gone, my question is, so understanding that they'd not gone through this options with this project and knowing that we have many decrepit old pipes out there, had they gone through this process on any other piece of property out there? So was there a standard that they had already set and utilized?
My recollection when we talked with them, I think most of, there are just a few pipes like this left. And most of the other pipes aren't there. This was just one big major line that was there, but I'm not positive if there are all other pipes there. I'm not sure.
Lane, I asked that specific question of MCWD, and they said that on the Dunes property, there are no other pipes like the ones that are in question to have been removed.
Do we know if there had been any in other, I mean, we've got 45 square miles that is the former Fort Ord. Had there been any other that we know of developments that, or disturbing of the earth that pipes had to be specially cared for? Do we know that?
Well, I am positive they have removed a lot of asbestos pipes.
Okay, I will defer now to Mayor Pro Tem Diala. Thank you very much for your question, for your answers.
And my assumption is their preferred option is to just remove the pipe. But again, if you went through the process and if we had trees and other mitigating things, the outcome could have been, well, you know what, we don't have to remove, we have potentially other options that we can look at. But I think the preferred option is you have asbestos pipes that have no function or use, let's get them out. That's always the best way to deal with it for any long-term impacts.
Thank you both. Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Yala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I will be asking a lot of questions just from the staff report, if I may, and I will defer from making any further comments or opinions on things. But okay, so on the first one, the picture of the line of trees, one that had been approved for removal, and then the 7 trees that were not approved for removal. I do think, as Christina Medina Dirksen has suggested, is that we probably need to know how many of those 7 could have been slated for removal, because it might make a difference in terms of how we look at it. But in all this talk of mitigations and possibly saving some other trees that were slated for removal, I'd like to know how we determine what trees get removed. Obviously, we have an arborist who makes a judgment about good, fair, and poor. But obviously, if we were slated to remove maybe just the poor, and now we're talking about maybe saving some of those, there must be other things that we do to assess which trees get removed if it's not just from the arborist. So I don't quite understand how that we can now say that other trees that were slated for removal might be retained. So I need to understand that criteria of tree removal. It's not just based on the 3 standards. So could I get an answer to that?
Let me jump in a little bit, then Guido can jump in.
Yeah.
Part of the answer goes back to the different development agreements that we have and the tentative maps that are approved. And so if you have a tentative map that's approved, that has these lots approved in the map and this infrastructure approved, that would be a criteria that you would look at, not necessarily the condition of the tree.
Okay.
But if they have that infrastructure approved and that tree is lying on the infrastructure, when they come in for that permit, that most likely would be approved. Now
Yeah,
we kind of went.
they have the carte blanche right to take down those trees, period, because it was in the specific plan for lots.
It was in a approved document. Typically, when you have your tentative map approved, that's when they're getting down to that level, saying, okay, you've approved this infrastructure. So that would be one thing or criteria or condition that would determine it. Another factor would be as you look at your grading of the property. And so the grade established may impact whether or not a tree will need to come down or not. So even though a tree may not be on a building lot per se, but if the grade is such in that area that it's 6 or 10 feet above the tree, or you're going to be digging a well around the tree at 6 or 10 feet, just the grading may say, okay, this tree probably needs to come or to be removed. So it's factors like that that you would look at in addition to your typical ones where you evaluate the condition of the tree. But then also the certain character of a tree, like we use the example of a tree on 3rd Avenue in their phase 1 of the development, where that tree was in a lot that was approved to come down, but as that was brought forward, and I can't remember if it was just Mike Owens that brought that forward or if that was a tree committee, but that was brought forward in a discussion, and ultimately, because of the character and the importance of that tree to the area and really to the development, the Dunes agreed, even though I think if they pushed it, they would have had the ability to tear it down because it was an approved lot. They agreed to keep it, and they lost a lot because of that, but it was a trade-off for the overall benefit for the development. So I think there's a lot of different reasons, and those would be some of the reasons why trees would be removed that aren't necessarily according to our city code or
Thank you.
policy.
Could you please explain the grading? I'm not quite understanding that. Why would we remove or keep a tree on grading issues?
So when we approve a tentative map, we're approving kind of the layout, but you don't have your final grading established. But when you finally establish your grading, and when they do the grading, because they're trying to match up with existing infrastructure, the existing streets around, other parks, other amenities. But when you finally get that grading plan and you look at it, the grade of the soil, there's a tree, your actual grading may be 6 feet below where that tree is. And so if the actual grading is, the tree is not
Okay.
going to be able to survive. And it's vice versa. If they're moving dirt, it's going to bury the tree.
I
And
see. Okay, got it.
so the grading does have an impact
Okay,
on
great.
trees.
Thank you. Okay, my next question is, in the penalty section, it says the condition of eucalyptus trees are not required to be recorded and are therefore not required to be replaced. I know that on Beach Avenue, we have a whole line of heritage eucalyptus trees with a sign on it. So is this something that we need to reconsider, or is this what we want for the future, that eucalyptus trees are totally negligible in terms of our city intents?
I'll punt that one to Guido. I mean, I think the trees along Beach were a separate specific action by the city council. I think if the council is interested in relooking at eucalyptus trees and whether or not to preserve those, that would be a whole different discussion on. Let's look at our tree ordinance, and if there's other trees we want to add or change, that would be a different discussion.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that quote is actually from the binding specific plan. So if other projects, if that's something, but I believe through the development agreements,
Right.
that language would be binding on this project. Is that correct, Lane? Or?
Yes, I mean, eucalyptus trees will be an interesting public discussion because there's a lot of reasons why you don't like eucalyptus trees. But there are some reasons
Right.
why you potentially may want to look at them. I think that the council kind of, when they reached that balance on saying the ones on Beach, I think ultimately they said, the benefit of keeping these trees here and designating them historic, and that they went that route. But
Okay.
you'll have a vigorous discussion on eucalyptus trees.
Okay, just in terms of replacement trees or retaining ones that might not have, been saved. So that is just a question for that. Okay, and then going to the two other options besides the replacement of 6 to 1. So I think, this is part of the first task, is to decide on the mitigations and the penalties or whatever. So I would like to find out, instead of us coming up with the options, because we've mentioned some already, that we would retain ones that were slotted for removal, maybe using the median as a places for either retaining or putting in new some of the trees. But if we did fines, for example, are those fines restricted to using on the property for which the fines came out, or is this just fines that we could use to pay for an arborist or whatever?
Well, generally for code enforcement, what do they say? The crime has to, or the punishment has to match the crime, right? So it has to be proportional. The two court cases, Nolan and Dolan, right? Like a condition or a fine has to be proportional, and there has to be a reasonable relationship. So that would be all part of the code enforcement process of trying to find what would be an appropriate potential fine.
Okay, and I think that I had heard that the Dunes also was coming up with maybe an arborist on their side or on the city side, or there are other things that they have suggested and put forth, correct? Besides the two things that Lane, you mentioned. Is that true that they're going to be hiring a arborist or?
Correct. They're going to change some of their internal operating procedures, and they perhaps can maybe go into that in a little bit more detail. But one of them is they're going to have an arborist on site when any of this grading or tree removal happens, to make sure that only trees that have been approved to be removed will be removed.
Right.
And vice versa on our end, we've made the change in that we're going to have an inspector on site just to verify again that the ones removed are the ones that are slated to be removed, and will identify the trees to be preserved, hopefully to eliminate any chance of a mistake happening. And again, I'm not saying this other one was necessarily a mistake. It was a decision made by the subcontractor deliberately, but there's a lot of things in our processes that we know we can improve in the future, and the dunes on their end that hopefully can prevent this from happening again in the future.
Right. And we have the city administrative hearing officer, and then we also have something that sounds pretty legal like the DDA. But I would presume that if out of our council discussions and developer agreement, that we don't have to pursue those lines, correct? I mean, these are, there would be no reason to if we could figure out a win-win situation tonight or whatever other meeting we could have.
Yes, same as we do with any code enforcement compliance. Our goal is voluntary compliance and voluntary collaboration in figuring out without having to go to court. That is our last option always.
Right. And as far as I can see, all the options of mitigations or reparations, if you will, have already been covered, except maybe fines. But are we missing any other ones that could possibly be put to the table rather than us to kind of try and figure this out? I mean, are there other options at this point?
I think we've covered most of the ones we've talked about, but the public may have some comments on that, and the developer may also.
Okay, all right, great. So in the staff report, it says the assigned project planner was not signing off on a specific tree protection sheet within the grading or building permits. Did the city know about this form that we should have already had knowledge of? I mean, this was a form that was already in existence, correct?
No, that's something that I'm bringing over from the previous city.
Ah, got it.
I'm trying to so like I said, they have a really good arborist in Patrick. We have a very extensive staff report from the Planning Commission, but as the community development director, what I didn't see in talking to all the staff is on the back end, making sure all of that great work on the front end is actually enforced and reviewed and monitored. And what I understood in talking to multiple staff members is the planners have not been involved in signing off on the tree protection for the demo permits and the grading permits. So that's something that I'm trying to institute, not only for this project, but for it just makes good, it really is a best management practice. So.
Yes, thank you. I was confused about whether this was something we were doing before, but yes, I support that. Now, the project planner and in further in the staff report, we talk about some kind of monitoring. City inspector, is that the same thing, or are these two different people? A city inspector to go out there. It was on this tree preservation protection standard operating procedures. is the project planner that is going to be signing off is that the city inspector will be on site to ensure only trees recommended for removal by the planning department will be removed? Is that the same person?
We haven't really defined who that person will be. It could be the planning staff. It could be one of our actual inspectors from our building department, but it would be somebody on staff that has the actual plan, what's approved, will physically be out there on site verifying that the work being done is what is approved according to the planning documents.
Okay, great. And again, in the staff report under community meeting, it says the applicant agreed to conduct a site visit with concerned citizens for phase 3 and phase 4 of the development to further identify trees that could be retained for the latter parts of the project. So did this include, I believe it was the mayor that was included. Who of the city staff was part of this?
So the meeting that we had, Matt was there, Guido was there, I was there. Can't remember if Brian McMinn was there. And then the public was there, and the Dunes, they were there, and that was primarily who was there at the meeting. And the Dunes is committed, as well as us, to continue to have these further meetings with the public to continue to get their input. It was a great meeting, got a lot of good ideas and suggestions from the public, and we all kind of walked away with assignments of, yeah, we need to have a follow-up meeting and maybe multiple follow-up meetings.
But no one from the council is invited to those.
Correct. That this is just a public meeting with staff.
Including me, Kathy. We agreed at our last meeting, although I think it was a mistake, because now we're the most ignorant of anybody, the 5 of us. So I think we need to repeat that meeting with the 5 of us, making sure we take Brown Act precautions.
Mm-hmm. And I would be very happy to know the names of the people who attended from the public. I feel very appreciative, and I would really like to know the names of the people who participated in that. Okay.
Sure. Yeah, I was the one who set up the meeting. We can certainly share the names that are at least on the email chain that I have. So
Yes, thank you.
We can certainly share that.
Thank you. And then in the memorandum, you say they're going to spray paint with a red X. Does that red paint come off easily? I mean, I would hate to see all these trees with red marks on them. What kind of paint is that?
Councilmember, I haven't fully flushed out the type of paint and all that. It really was just as a way to alert the community. We had several people at the community meeting who said they walk by a lot of these trees each and every day. So that was just my idea as a way to give further notice to concerned citizens. But in terms of what type of paint and all that, I haven't fleshed that out. So
okay. And as we go through this process, I get the feeling that we are establishing kind of new standards for ourselves in terms of what trees get removed. And so I would hope that we quantify and identify some of those new changes, because I feel somehow through this process, some things are changing, because we are now going back and reconsidering decisions that we have made in the past. So I would like to always keep aware of that. Let's see.
understood.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's go to Councilmember Lisa Berkeley.
Yeah, there have been a couple of questions that have come up regarding sort of where the developer stands. And I noticed that Don Hoffer's hand is up in the panelist section. So I don't know if now is the time we want to hear from where they're coming from on this, but it might be worth it.
Okay, do you have any questions at this time, Lisa?
Oh, no.
Okay. Yeah, we'll go to Don and MCP team shortly.
Sorry about that. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm still trying to stay with Councilmember Burnett's direction or suggestion that we take these in pieces, and the first piece being the trees that were cut down. In the staff report, Guido, it says that, well, one thing we asked for was a 1 to 2 page summary from the developer regarding the trees that were removed without authorization as to their number, species, size, health. And that is something that Councilmember Marina Dirksen asked for, 20 minutes ago. And so I just want to be clear, did we get a 1 to 2 page summary of the phase 2 trees that were unauthorizedly removed from the developer about their health, et cetera, species, size?
We have that in our arborist reports from.
Yeah, but we didn't get a summary post action, post removal.
I don't believe I have that in.
So tonight, I think, is it true we're having Christina Dirksen's question go unanswered because we don't have the information that we requested?
All the questions that were asked of staff were in attachment 3. I can certainly provide that at a later time.
Yeah,
So.
I'm looking at attachment 3, and the answer to the question of the city developer producing a summary is that the staff report will discuss in more detail the timeline of events that caused the removal. Doesn't talk about the species, the health, which is what Christina Medina Dirksen was asking for. It's important information for us in the start of this meeting to understand what happened.
Right.
So can we go to that portion of the staff report that does discuss the timeline that caused the removal of trees 1384 through 1396?
Sure, absolutely. So.
And then
Okay.
Christina, we're just gonna have to be put on hold until we can find out what the species, the size, and the health of the removed trees was, because right now we don't have it at our fingertips, which would have been in a 1 page summary that we requested a few weeks ago, March 15th.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're going to look at the timeline of events that's in the staff report.
Yeah, it's on. I mean, I can pull up. I mean, we just kind of summarized what occurred. If you would like me to pull that up on the staff report. So.
Yeah.
So.
So is it in the project tree background paragraph that summarizes the timeline events?
Yeah, this is the timeline of events, Mr. Mayor. So.
Okay, so January 14th, 2021, there were removal tree permits for the below market rate home sites 1 and 2.
Yeah, and
Is
I have the reference to the full. If you would like me to pull it up, I can certainly pull that up in terms of the specific. It's a pretty.
That's okay. Can you scroll up to? Can you please go back to where you were just
Sure.
seconds ago?
Oh, we cannot see the screen.
I saw what you were doing earlier. I could see it. The font was getting a little small, but if we increase the font.
Sure. Yeah, you had asked for the staff report. I was just trying to pull that up. It's actually referenced in the inside the body of the report.
Okay, well, it says your font red says the staff report for this special meeting will discuss in more detail the timeline of events that caused the unpermitted removal of trees 1384 to 1386. So I would like to discuss that timeline if it's in the staff report, because it says that it will be discussed in the staff report in more detail.
Yeah, this is the timeline of events, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So.
Mayor Pro Tem Biala, can you read that? Can you enlarge the font a bit, please?
Sure.
I think the screen sharing is working. It's just a matter of how big the font is. Now, can you move it? There you go. So basically, this is saying the timeline is that the Planning Commission gave a tree removal permit for some trees, but not the trees that were removed. And then on March 21st, 2022, the applicant subcontractor removed, removed the pipe and had to take down the trees at that time. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, because it actually doesn't say that they cut down the trees. It just says that they removed the pipe that was below the trees. That's not the point. The point is that they removed the trees, and it doesn't say that they did that. Okay,
Well, if you go up to the top of the first page, it does clearly articulate that city staff did receive comments from the community about the removal of the trees. So that is on the first page of the staff report. So,
okay. So that's how the 1384 to 1396 numbered trees, that's the timeline of how they were removed.
that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Now, can you go to the report in the April 25th memo? It's a table. It has two columns. Column 1 says phase, column 2 says report, and it talks about basically the timeline of biosurveys. And it's in page 1 of your April 25th, 2022 memo. It's in the staff report.
April 25th.
It's basically a point-by-point response to my questions and suggestions.
Sure.
April 25th, 2022 memo. Okay, so can you scroll down a little bit more? Okay, so
Sure.
this table, it has phase column and report column. It goes through, this is a question, it goes through the monitoring of biological resources that was done in this vicinity of the 7 remain of the phase 2. Is that correct?
Yeah, the council had asked for some detailed information related to the nesting of birds survey and the bat special status report. And so I put all that together and just kind of came up with a very quick outline so the council was aware that the applicant actually has been doing those and implementing those conditions of approval.
Good. Okay, now let's stop here now. Industry standard is if I want to cut down a tree for which I have to do a biosurvey, is it true that that biosurvey should be done within 30 days of cutting the tree down? Because that would be temporal to when the birds might be in the tree. Like if it's 6 months old outside of nesting season, that's not going to help me predict who's going to be nesting next spring, right?
Yeah, I'm actually at home and I'm reading the actual report that was prepared, and it does implement the condition of approval. I'm trying, in terms of the specific time frame, I'm trying to find.
Okay, so what I'm getting at is that you mentioned, you showed us a few minutes ago that the trees were basically cut down in March of 2022. So that there was a bat survey or a bird nest survey in April 13th, 2020, 2 years ago. That's not very relevant to March 21st, 2022. So then there was one November 17th, 2020, almost 2 years ago. March 23rd, 2021, approximately a year ago. January 31st, 2022. Now we're getting close. So that's 2 months ahead and before the nesting season begins. And that was it, right?
Mr. Mayor, Patrick is the arborist who actually prepared those reports. He probably would be the better person to address these questions too.
Right. So the questions that we could all answer is one that it looks like it's true, isn't it? That January 31st, 2022 was the most recent bird nest report. Is that correct?
There is a March 10th report that's referenced that I could certainly pull up if you'd like, Mr. Mayor.
But in your staff report in front of us, it says that supplemental report determined that trees should be retained. Is that because of, do we know why that is that because of existing nesting birds or some other
Well,
reason?
that's for phase 2 east. So that's a separate part of, so that's not really relevant to this discussion. So you'll see it
Okay.
as phase 2 east.
Okay.
Phase 2. There's
Okay,
phase
so
2
then,
north, so it's different phases
Okay.
of the project. So
so the most relevant,
yeah.
so the 7 trees, were those, what state were those in phase 2 what? Phase 2 east, phase 2 south?
Well,
Or were-
there's phase 2 east and there's phase 2 west. And Mr. Mayor, like I said, I'd probably ask that you ask these questions of Patrick. He is the arborist who prepared these reports.
Is
So
Patrick on the line now?
he is on the line.
Oh,
But
okay,
Mayor,
that's-
but I
Go
can
ahead.
answer you that the 7 trees you're referring to, those are in phase 3, not phase 2.
Okay,
So the 2 that were permitted were in phase 2, but illegal, or the ones that were not permitted, were in phase 3.
Okay, so for the ones that were in phase 3, there's not yet been, has there yet been a biosurvey of those trees in phase 3?
We haven't, they submitted the application, but I don't think we've gone through any of our processes on that.
So it's true that the arborist has photographed and assessed the phase 3 trees to make the phase 3 tree report, but it's true that they haven't yet gotten to the nesting and biological values. Is that correct?
I believe so, but Guido, do you know for sure?
I believe so, but once again, I would defer to the project arborist on that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so we have Don on our side here. Let's bring Patrick Krabacher over as the,
Mr. Mayor, I'd ask that you direct questions to me and not our consultants at this time. I'm happy to
Okay.
answer these questions for you.
all right, I was just going with staff's suggestion, so we won't
I
ask.
think you're in the
arborist.
staff questioning period at this point. I'm happy to answer those questions if you'd like.
Okay, so have there been any biosurveys aside from assessment of the tree's health and species and size in phase 3?
Not yet.
So of the trees that were cut down, there were no biosurveys done before they were,
So, I mean, we didn't anticipate that they were coming down. And so no, biological surveys, what we would call bird and bat surveys hadn't been conducted on those trees yet. However, they've been conducted on every other tree removal that we've conducted on the site. Traditionally, we were very close to the what we would say is the nesting season, although our environmental impact report doesn't necessarily specifically define that for birds. We've never encountered a bat issue in trees on the entire site, and there's no evidence that when those trees came down, there were any biological impacts at all.
right. Now there's no evidence that there's no evidence one way or another on those 7 trees, right?
No, there's no evidence that there were no biological impacts.
Right. We don't know anything about what was in those trees when they were removed because there was no effort to find out.
No, there was plenty of eyes on that, right, from both the public who reported it and our contractors, and there were no impacts noted.
I'm not following you, Don. I'm sorry.
There were many people that were out at the site when the trees came down, right? Many
And so
people.
if there was a
They weren't
nest,
biologists, but there was no one that reported a impact to birds or bats.
okay, so if
Okay?
there was
And
a,
so in the absence
Don, if there was
of
my next question, Don, is if there was a raptor nest with some eggs in it and the tree came down, who would have noted that?
anyone could have, and there's
the
no
whole-
report of that happening.
Okay. All right. Don, on the screen, can you see where it says March 10th, 2022 supplemental tree report?
No, but let me see if I can find it.
Guido has been sharing the screen and right now, oh no, you're not sharing. I'm looking at my computer. So Guido, can you share the screen you had on earlier that showed the table?
Sure.
So scroll down just a touch. So where it says March 10th, 2022 supplemental tree report, do you see that, Don?
Yes.
I was going to ask the arborist, but I'm asking you, do you know why trees 571 and 580 should be retained? Is that because of biological presence or some other reason?
Yeah, I'd have to pull up that report.
Well, Guido, we went that direction already, and you suggested the arborist, and Don is suggesting himself. So we're asking Don.
I will have to pull that report, and so when I have an opportunity to make my comments, Mayor, I'll get back to that issue. So give me a few minutes, and I'll have an answer for you. I don't have it right at my fingertips.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the report right now.
Guido, in your pre-construction suggestions of standard operating procedures, you have something in there that says that you advise no more than 30 days in advance would the bio surveys be done. Is that true?
Let me pull up what I prepared.
Now I'm asking you to pull up 2 things simultaneously.
Yeah, no, it's okay. I a lot of that stuff I pulled just straight from the specific plan. So just, yeah, a lot of this, the second page is just straight from the specific plan. But I am addressing your first question, Mr. Mayor. So.
Okay, so the first question was, why were those 2 trees retained? Because although we can't talk to the arborist right now who's online, I think it might have been because there were some biological resources present, such as a raptor nest.
Well, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, let me respond to that. I can tell you that, we're looking for the detail on that, and rather than guess, I'd like to be able to present the facts. And secondly, I mean, to your point, there have been examples on the site where there have been biological resources, and we've retrained operations around them. There was a bluebird in a tree on phase 2 north that we delayed deconstruction until that bird, vacated. There's been a few instances throughout the site where that's happened. That has not happened in the area of these trees or in the area of our phase 2, or I'm sorry, affordable site 2, which is the adjacent site where the work was being done.
Okay. So
yeah.
that language that you see on the screen, Don, relative to March 10th, 2022, is that the kind of language that we would see if a nest was found and the report preparer determined that those trees should be retained? Is there any other reason why they would say, let's retain these trees?
Well, let me find the facts out rather than guess.
All right, Guido, while he's finding the facts out, can you tell us if it's true that you recommend in your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, no more than 30 days in advance will biosurveys be completed?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pulling that just straight from the specific plan. So whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if I'm a biologist and I shouldn't do a survey more than 30 days in advance of removing a tree, can you explain why that we would have that 30-day prior to the construction? What's the point of that?
My understanding that the goal of that was to not impact any active deaths near the tree. I believe that was the premise for
Right.
why that's
So
in the arborist report.
Right.
So
Okay, so if the trees were cut down without permit in March, then we probably wouldn't really want to rely on a biological report that was much earlier than February. Is that correct?
right, but the overall premise is the overall tree removal permit is reviewed. The arborist report is prepared, and as you're getting closer and closer to potential removal, then the city makes the surveys be done, and that's the general gist of how the policy would be implemented. Is if you're getting close to potentially impacting a species, you want to make sure you're not, right? So you don't want to approve an arborist report 3 years ago and then knock out a tree that has some bat or some bird or whatnot. So that's why you're asking for the surveys to be done closer to removal, right? That's the overall premise.
So I'm restricted to asking questions right now, so I have to kind of go about it in a roundabout way. But it's true then that what was on the screen as far as November 2020, March 2021, even January 2022, it's really not complying, is it, with what you just discussed? If you're talking about a mid-March tree removal.
Well, maybe I didn't do a good enough job, Mr. Mayor, but what I was trying to show, and maybe I could do a better job of articulating it, but when I reviewed all of the documents and all of the tree permits, it appeared from when I reviewed all the stuff that they actually were implementing the mitigation measures of doing the bird nest studies, doing the bat studies and all that. And maybe I could have put it in a different format, but when I reviewed all the stuff, it appeared as if they were doing that. In terms of the specific dates and all that, obviously that I'd have to do a little bit more digging, but that was when I reviewed all the stuff, that was my overall impression. That I've worked for multiple cities, and oftentimes people try to not do the mitigation measures. It seemed as if they were actually being very diligent about following up on the surveys.
Yeah, I'm impressed that they had November, March, January, and then another March, it appears, survey that determined they want to keep those 2 trees, maybe because there was a nest in them. And that's the way, that's good. They're complying and they're doing the right thing. So we'll wait for Don to come back and tell us why 571 and 580 were retained. But Guido, I wanted to ask you and the city manager a question. This is my last one, except for the one that Don is looking at. When you mentioned that the penalties had to be proportional, or the compensation had to be proportional, if we determined by some best available information technique that the trees that were removed had an $80,000 to $100,000 value, and then we talked about proportionality, could we be discussing, some kind of actions that were monetarily in the same range, like relocate 7 other big trees, even if it might cost you up to a few $100,000 because the value lost was several $100,000, and so this would be proportional?
Unfortunately, our city attorney's not here, and so I don't want to speak out of turn. And maybe if Lane wants to chime in, but obviously, whatever penalty you impose based on the Nolan and Dolan cases, it has to be, once again, proportional to what occurred, and it has to have a reasonable, rational relationship to a condition on the project. But if Lane wants to chime in, so.
Yeah, I would think that that's part of the feedback we're interested from the council as an end result of the study session. So if you're interested in looking at fines that are proportional to the replacement or mitigation of this, then I think that that's some of the direction that we're looking at. And so then we'll reach out to our attorneys and kind of figure out that. So I think from a big picture, yeah, if you're interested in things like that, that's some of the outcome that we'd like to hear.
All right, I do have one other question. Lane, to you. The trees along First Avenue that are straddling where 6th Street would hit First Avenue if there was a 6th Street, there are trees approved for removal, but they're still there north of the 6th Street line and south of the 6th Street line, immediately adjacent to First Avenue. Have you had any discussions with Don and his team regarding retaining some of those destined for removal in exchange for those that were removed without authorization?
Yes, we have. We've done a couple things. Even though those are part of Phase 2 West that have already been approved to be removed, we've asked them in writing to not remove those, to pause that. They have agreed in writing that they would not move forward with removal of those, and we are in discussions with them right now of potentially not removing some of those, and they're going to come back with a picture of those trees that, from their perspective, they would be willing to remove as potentially a trade-off mitigation from these other ones.
Do you mean remove from the removal list, or you mean relocate?
Remove the removal list and keep in place.
All right, kind of a double negative, but I want to make sure I understood it. All right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Let's turn it over. I don't see Don's picture up, so let's turn it over to David Burnett. Councilmember Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question for the city manager. As this is the second occurrence of a removal without permission, does the agreement, is there any kind of escalation procedures to say that first occurrence it's a 6-to-1, second occurrence there's some other follow-on, more punitive measures? Thank you. That's my question.
Our code does not provide for that.
Mr. Mayor, you're muted.
Thank you. So, Lane, I have a question for you, follow up from what Councilmember Burnett just said. Is it your understanding that the tenor of your discussions with Don and his team since March, since the trees came down, that nobody really, what we're really looking for is a win-win? We're looking to properly compensate, but we really don't care if we don't care about the penalties, or we're really just, is the tenor of your discussions with Don's team. One, looking for reasonable next steps to compensate for damage done.
Yes, absolutely. That is our full focus with them, and that is their focus with us, is they've admitted it was a mistake. They want to try to work with us on the best possible solution to correct and fix this this problem that happened. And so at this point, it's all in very positive. We aren't talking litigation. We aren't talking penalties. We're trying to talk about what are solutions to make this right.
Okay. But we wanted to know about the default and the code enforcement hearing so that everybody was on the same page as far as what's going on.
Yes.
What are the theoretical directions we could take it? Okay, so I think this would probably be a good time to go to the public hearing to hear from the developer first, and then go to the public. And then when we come back, I think we'll have a lot more discussion on the second part of what David Burnett wanted to address, and that is, what do we do about phase 3? But we have been focused mostly on what we're going to do about the past, which was, well, partly phase 3, because that's where they were. But let's go over now to Don Holford. Hello, Don.
Hi, guys. So I guess I'll start off just real quickly with a response on the 2 trees in the supplemental report from March 10th. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quickly. Hopefully I've got the right one up and you guys can see this. Oh, I got to hit share. Did that work?
Yeah, just a little enlargement would be good.
All right, well, hold on. Let me try it one more time and make sure I've got the right one up here. So the supplemental report on March 10th, I'm not seeing, oh, okay. Yeah, I've got to get used to this. I'm sorry. I'm used to working in Teams, and this is obviously Zoom. But so this is the March 10th report that came from Denise Duffy and Associates. And the trees that were identified in this report were along California Avenue on the phase 2 east side of the project area. And this is relative to efforts that we were making separately to preserve oak trees. And so this deals more with the issue of Hilltop Park. But these are the 2 trees, 571 and 580, which were retained because we could retain them, right? They were permitted for removal, but instead retained is my understanding of the issue there. So that's what that issue was. It wasn't an issue relative to biology, which I think is what was asked, whether nesting birds or bats or other things in those trees. That was not the case. It was just simply, could we retain more trees? And relative to the issue of the oaks on the east side of the project, that was part of our effort. So
that's great, Don, because that's going to make a lot of people happy, because in this big story of trees around the city, California Avenue trees that had been orange fenced off, it was important to folks, including myself, that maybe the developer could save some of those oaks. So you did save 2 of those oaks as shown.
Yeah, we did. And there's another point here also, and I'll put up just so you guys can see the level of diligence that we use. Patrick went out. Patrick is our biologist at Denise Duffy and Associates, and his staff has indicated we think he does a great job. But he goes in here and he says, right, so they conducted nesting bird surveys prior to all ground disturbing activities on March 22nd and January 20th. No active nests were found during the survey efforts, right? So it gives you an idea of what's going on kind of on our side. So there were some efforts around recommendations he was making to us about tree protection in those areas around those trees. And so that was part of that report also. So this, we're sort of opening this up to show you some of the effort and how we go through things on our side. But that's what that one report was that was in Guido's table there, and what was going on within that. That's the dialogue that's going on with us. So I was scrambling a little bit to pull that actual report to be able to report to let you guys know exactly what was happening. But I want to, take you back. I almost wish I had had an opportunity at the beginning of this to walk you through the issue from our perspective. And it might have helped. And as I go this evening, I'm going to do my best to answer some of the questions that I heard that I didn't know. I'll go through it. The first issue, I guess, to talk through is kind of what happened, right? And how do we get to where we were when the trees, these 7 trees were removed? You have to start with MCWD. I'm sorry, you just do. And it's not to call out people or to post blame on other people, but I want to walk you guys through what happened so you can understand the dynamic, right? This has been a team effort on the dunes from day one. The city's been involved, MCWD's involved, we as the developers also are very involved. We're the ones doing the work, okay? But we had submitted plans for what we call Affordable Site 2 for deconstruction work, grading, and then infrastructure necessary to serve that site. As part of that, we submit plans to the city and to MCWD. In terms of MCWD, their role is obviously with regards to the facilities that they own and operate. And in this case, there was what we call an ACP pipe that ran across the northern boundary of the Affordable Site 2 between from 2nd Avenue generally west, and it went all the way to 1st Avenue. And our original plan was to remove that ACP pipe within the boundaries of that Affordable Site 2. And the response that came back from MCWD after our first plan check submittal, so we submit the drawings to them, they mark them up and they make comments, and then they give them back to us. We respond to those comments and adjust it, and eventually through a number of these types of iterations, we get to approved plans. Well, in that first plan check, the comment from MCWD was to extend the removal of that pipe, that ACP pipe, all the way to 1st Avenue. And so our consultants did that on the drawings. They made that adjustment. And we can show you guys. I mean, I wasn't in the room when the conversation was had with MCWD between your staff, but I can tell you that we've got the plan check comments. I can show them to you. The direction was given from MCWD to remove the pipe. So we put that on the drawings and eventually got to a deconstruction approval from MCWD for that work. That work was also submitted to the city on drawings that were given to the city for the site and approved by the city. Okay, so while there are a lot of cooks in the kitchen, this is actually what happened. And so, we talked, and I don't know if you guys remember, but at the city council meeting a couple of weeks ago, Lane Long made the point that there were multiple failures. There were multiple failures on behalf of, us, on behalf of the city, on behalf of MCWD, on, others, our contractors, but it all led up to these small errors, right? None of this was malicious, right? These small errors led up to what happened. Okay, so we got the approval to go begin work. And unfortunately, there wasn't a verification back to the tree removal permit that if you remove the pipe, the trees would have to come out also, right? Now, these trees, mind you, the 7 trees that we've talked a lot about, were part of a tree removal permit application that was made to the city on September 3rd last year, 2021. The application had been made with our phase 3 tentative map application at the time, and it was pending, right? So our error of course was we removed the trees, or our contractor removed the trees before the permit was issued. But guys, the permit was going to have to be issued, right? In order for us to be able to build the project, to put the grading in place, to fill the land, to create the lots, to build the project, these trees were going to have to come down. Okay, and I'm not saying that to advocate, responsibility or to say, hey, we didn't make an error, but to sort of frame the discussion, right? Because it feels like the discussion has gone so far to an extreme, at least from the questioning tonight, it leads you to believe that, that's the case. And we can debate that or whatever. And obviously, as the developer, that's my position. We have a DA, a development agreement, and a DDA, and it requires that we have the ability to construct the site to build the project. So that's that's kind of the details, I guess, to some degree. I'm happy to answer more questions around that issue about how we got to where we were. I'm going to jump forward though and try to answer some of the questions, about that were asked tonight. And I think one of the relevant questions that is important has to do with the SOPs. So there was some discussion earlier about, revisions to the standard operating procedures and how that might work. And I will tell you that I think it's entirely relevant, and we support staff tremendously in this regard. We want for the project to go smoothly. We've been your partner for many years, and we want to be your partner for many years and do the right thing in your community. And so we don't want to have these types of conversations or have these types of issues that come up and happen. We want to be a good builder in your town. And I hope you guys know, I think you all know that. In terms of the SOP, if what Guido is saying gets implemented, the beauty of it is that we now have this process that this error that existed between the deconstruction plans that were approved by multiple agencies and the tree removal permit would have been identified, right? Planning would review it. It would be on this sheet. It would have been identified. And so that is really relevant. And I think it's a great suggestion. We support staff in that. I mean, the idea that there will be a unique page in the drawing set that deals specifically with tree removal and tree protections that is then consistent with the tree removal permit that planning approves and signs off on is great, right? I mean, it's a great idea. So we're fully supportive of that. And this is the kind of stuff that I hope we can get to in this discussion. We want to find ways to make it better, right? We want to find ways to make sure we don't end up in this situation again in the future, and that ultimately we build a project that everybody's happy with, right? That you feel like you got what you thought you were getting when you signed that development agreement in 2005 that gave us the rights to develop the project. And we're all proud of it when we step back from it when it's complete and say, yeah, we did that. It was good. Did we stub our toe once or twice along the way? Obviously, yes, we have, but we got better through the process and we made it better. So, I mean, I hope you can see through what I'm saying there that, was this an inadvertent thing that happened? Yes. Was it malicious? No. I don't think anybody was out there going, hey, we're going to really get them. We're going to go, we hate tree. Nothing like that, right? It was a contractor that was given a task, go remove this pipe. We talked about ACP pipe. ACP is asbestos cement pipe, right? So this pipe has to be removed. I think there was some discussion about maybe REM, the general manager at MCWD, saying no, it could stay in the ground. The difference here is that it's not in the public right of way. This pipe was existing on where future private lots would be. And so, we could talk more about that if you want, but, again, the issue with these 7 trees goes beyond that ACP pipe though. If it, the pipe is on a private lot, I can't sell a private lot with ACP pipe on it to a homeowner. And so, that would have to be resolved. But before you could even get there, guys, there's a grading issue. There's issues with other utilities. Again, these trees we're gonna have to come out, unfortunately. The question came up, and I apologize if I was supposed to provide something that I didn't. I can share the screen. I can send a snapshot of this. But the 7 trees that were removed I'm going to put up on the screen here. They're highlighted in this report. That they were all in fair condition. And again, this detail will be sent to you. This report is fully available to the public now. It's our tree survey for phase 3. Each tree within it is identified. I'll walk you through it so you can see it. It's coming up on your screen right now. So, and hopefully you can see that. I'll make it a little larger. The highlighted trees that are identified here are the 7 trees that were removed. All of them, in terms of health, were in fair condition. Okay, and so our our specific plan in EIR has a procedure that is within it that's to be used on the Dunes project that rates a tree as either being in fair condition. Well, let me start, either in good condition, fair condition, or poor condition. And these 7, they were all in fair condition, and they were all recommended for removal by DDA. They were all Monterey cypress trees. These are the numbers here, obviously, that we talked about earlier. And then the individual stem height at breast height is identified here. So
that's the diameter, how wide they are.
yes, at breast height. So you're right. They were, these weren't necessarily small trees. So I can take a snapshot of that as a summary for you. And before this meeting's over tonight, I'll email it over to Guido and to Lane, and they can distribute it on. Certainly not looking to withhold any information here.
Dawn, this is Guido. Actually, I've had it up on the website since April 14th.
Okay.
That tree, because that was one of the asks of the city council. So.
Yep, perfect. And I'll just take a snapshot of this as a summary, because I think what you have up there is the full report, and this will summarize the 7 trees that were impacted. I will throw out that we've talked a little bit about the biological issue. I'm not going to get into that more, but I would be happy to discuss or answer any questions you guys have on that. I will throw out, we did have this meeting with the community. I thought it went really well. There was a lot of discussion within that about, phase 3 and actually what we call phase 2 west, which is the area just north of where these trees were. And in particular, there are 24 trees in phase 3 and phase 2 west that we are looking to try to retain. There's a lot of factors that go into a site like this where we're balancing all these needs, right? There is we've talked about sort of 2-dimension, right? Where are the streets, where are the individual lots, where are the houses? The 3rd dimension, though, to talk about is utilities, right? And so where are utilities present? And one of the things that we deal with on the utility side has to do with drainage. So you guys all know that as part of the base reuse plan, that every site within Fort Ord has to contain their own stormwater. And we do that through putting in place infiltration galleries. And those infiltration galleries have to be at the low point on the site, right? Generally, and so one of the things we're struggling with is generally the site is highest along 2nd Avenue and lowest along 1st Avenue. There's about 40 feet of fall between those two. So the site drains from the east to the west, with the west being the low point. We are struggling a little bit right now with drainage. Where do we put these big infiltration galleries that have to be at the low end of the site because water goes downhill, right? So there's issues like that. There's grading we've talked about where there may be fill or cut. And in some areas, you can't have a tree where there's going to be 4 or 5 feet of fill around it. It ends up being down in a hole. And for some of you that are familiar with the Del Monte Shopping Center, they attempted to do that there in a lot of areas. Most of those trees died, and because they get wet feet, right? They're constantly inundated with water. In addition, areas where there's cut and you have to lower the existing ground, you end up with a tree that's up on a pedestal. And so there's a lot that goes into this where we're adjusting grades, trying to figure out what we can save, what we can't, how we can address, in particular along 1st Avenue, streets and sidewalks and parking bays and, all these things to be able to save these trees. But I will tell you that I think coming out of the meeting that we had last Monday, or I guess it would be a week ago last Monday, so it was last week, it was very positive, right? I think one of the community members came up to me and said, hey, Don, in phase 2 west, you've had permits for over a year to remove trees along 1st Avenue. Why haven't you done it? Like, why didn't you just go remove them? And my response was, look, Mike, it's because we weren't convinced they had to come down yet, to be honest with you, right? We were still trying to figure it out. So there are trees along 1st Avenue that are these large matriarch trees, I think is what the mayor has used for the terminology, that as a developer, we have had permitted to remove for a really long time, but we haven't removed them because, again, we're trying to see if we can save them. So you guys, like, it's easy to villainize us as the developer, but what I'm trying to let you in on here is that we're doing everything we can not to be the villain developer, right? We're trying to be a good developer and a good partner with you and your community. Did we stub our toe? Yeah, we did, and we're sorry for that. But we're all in when it comes to making revisions or changes to make sure that we reduce the potential that this could ever happen again in the future. So what changes are there, right? I mentioned changes. I would say, first of all, we've talked about some of Guido's ideas with regards to changes to, adding that sheet to the drawings that has the tree removal and the permitted removal and the protections. We're on board with that. We've talked about planning sign off. We support staff on that. We think that's a great idea. Tree protection. One of the things you saw in the packet tonight was a recommendation that we go from that orange fencing that you've seen to chain link fencing. And that was our idea. And we offered that. We said, look, we're going to enhance our tree protection when we're out there, and we're going to go to a chain link fence standard instead of that orange construction fencing. We're willing to do that. City inspector interface. So your city manager has referenced to you also that the city that there will be a biologist on site and an inspector. And where this comes from is a little bit out of us going, okay, on the Marina Community Partner side, how can we manage this better? Well, for me, it's creating like one person that's responsible for it on our team, right? Having a superintendent or a team member that is like the tree manager. Before any tree comes down from any of our subcontractors, this person is there, they sign off on it. Yes, that tree is permitted for removal. So they're an expert. They're a single source expert on our side relative to our tree removal permits, to tree protection, and to making sure that before any contractor goes out there and cuts a tree down, that person has cleared it because they know it's permitted and they know that the trees around them haven't been permitted are protected well. So that's a change we're making. We've had a position open for about a month now, seeking to hire that person into that role, and we think we might be getting close. So that's some of what we're doing. I hope I haven't missed anything. I will tell you that tonight, we've got multiple members of the Marina Community Partner team on the call with us. Both internal and external are. I think there's about 5 of us, including Kurt Honadell, who's our offsites director. Doug Yant's on. Doug's a panelist tonight. If you have questions of him, by all means, feel free to ask Doug if you need an additional perspective on things on how we're handling it. We've got our biologist, our civil engineer, and we have 2 of our attorneys that are working on entitlements in this issue with us, just to sort of show you guys how serious we are about it, right? We don't take this lightly. We don't want you to think that we do, but we also want you to understand what really happened, right? And the fact that this has been a team approach. Managing a project like this and developing it is a huge task. We have a lot of great things coming. We've got the promenade that is nearing improvement plan approval and start of grading. We've got phase 3 acquisition that we need to get through a tentative map and ultimately a tree removal permit for phase 3, and removal of blight in phase 3, tearing down those barracks. We're close on all this stuff, including starting construction on 142 affordable apartments in your community. And so we would hope that you guys as council members would see us as, hey, MCP is a good partner. Yeah, we stubbed our toe. There's a little bit and a lot of this, even city staff and MCWD staff in this, and we're all working together to make it better. And we're trying to do the right thing in the community, right? And we want to move this project forward, not talk about default under our DA, not talk about $100,000 penalties. Let's talk about what we can control. And so I just ask for you to try to look at it in that context. And lastly, I'll just leave you with a few numbers, right? So we talk about mitigation, right? Tree mitigation. And there's this 2-to-1 ratio and then a 6-to-1 ratio. And just to give you an idea, we have what's called Phase 2 East. A lot of you know what that is. That's the area under construction today where we're building homes around the Hilltop Park. And in Phase 2 East, there were 149 trees that were impacted. That results in a mitigation of about 400 trees. So when you do the 2-to-1 ratio, or even on Hilltop Park, if there's a compensatory ratio of 6-to-1 because we impacted trees there we weren't supposed to by accident, that gets you to about 400 trees that would be required to be planted. When you add up all the trees that are currently planned for the Hilltop Park, that are part of our affordable site 1, and a part of all the production in that area, it's over 1,000 trees. The count is 1,069 trees that we will be planting in Phase 2 East. And so, we're more than 2 times what will be required, even if you look at all these different ratios, right, for mitigation and otherwise. And it'll be similar in Phase 2 West and Phase 3, right? So the tree removal permit that we're requesting, the initial look at it for Phase 3 had 458 trees that would be impacted in the Phase 3 area as part of that. Obviously, the 24 that we've talked about, I think the number is, doing the math in my head, 17 that are in Phase 3 that would come off of that. And depending on how things go with some of these storm drainage galleries and grading issues, that number of 24 may come down. Today, I can tell you that based on even the work that's been done by our team in the last 2 weeks, that number looks like it's probably going to be more like 19. But the process that we'd normally go through would involve us submitting improvement plans, very involved with your staff, with Brian and Edry and your civil engineering, folks, to go through so that we can all agree that, no, this infrastructure is needed, right? You got to have somewhere for the water to go, or for the pipes to be, or for other things, streets, right? Curb, gutter, sidewalk, that kind of stuff. The specific plan identified that this could be an issue. And one of the provisions in the specific plan, a tool that we have to work with, is it says that we can eliminate parking bays in streets, right? And instead of having a detached sidewalk, make the sidewalk attached. So it's curb and gutter, and then the sidewalk attached to it, if it helps us to preserve existing tree resources. And so we're going to be doing that. We're going to be coming to your staff with plans in Phase 2 West and Phase 3 that say, hey, in order for us to preserve some of these trees along First Avenue, we need to, not have a parking bay in this area, maybe, not have the sidewalk be detached, but have it be right up against the curb and gutter in ways that enable us to retain some of these tree resources. But there will be some where, we've got nowhere else to put stormwater. And you look at it from an engineering perspective with your team, we'll work through those issues. And what we would like is the ability to do that, right? The ability to sit down and go through that. We've agreed to meet with members of the community and go through in much more detail with them and show them what there's, it is what it is. I mean, some of these things you can't just make the water go away, right? You have to deal with it. So I've probably said enough. I hope you guys can get a flavor for where we're at. I want to thank you for your time. I'm sorry I've been a little bit long-winded, but I wanted to be thorough, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right. Thank you, Don. How about we do this, council members? There's 3 of us with our hands up. How about we be very brief with any questions we have for Don? Maybe save some of them beyond brevity for after the public hearing. So we ask all the questions we have, but for right now, since we've already been on this for a couple hours, let's just ask very brief questions, maybe 1 or 2 per person, but very brief so that we can get to the public. Let's start with Councilmember Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Don, you don't have to elaborate on this. I have a question for you, and that is, your instructions to contractors, are they usually verbal, written? And then also, when a contract is completed, do they sign off? Is there some paperwork involved in, yeah, it was completed, it took this many hours, these many people? And then my second question has to do with the intention all along since the beginning was to remove these trees. That's my understanding, that you've identified them as scheduled to be removed. So your plan all along was to remove the trees. Those are my two questions.
Okay. Is it okay, Mayor, to go ahead and answer as we go? Okay. So the first question, no, our directions to our contractors are both verbal and written, primarily written, right? We have a legal agreement between us that specifies the scope of work, what's to be done, schedule, that kind of thing. There are always discussions or directions, daily things that happen in the field between staff though. So that's just kind of the nature of contracting and how it works.
Whose staff, Don, whose staff has those discussions?
Ours, mine, Marina Community Partners and Shea Homes, we have site superintendents that are responsible for directing our trades, on an ongoing basis, but they have a contract too, right? So there's a legal agreement between us that specifies what they're supposed to do. And in this case, we had an approved deconstruction plan from Marina Coast Water District and the city that called for the removal of an asbestos-laden pipe, right? The gap there, though, was we didn't have a tree removal permit issued yet for these trees. It was a timing issue, right? Really, I think that. Let's see. Then your second question: when the work is done, we have processes internally. Obviously they have to be paid, right? So my team signs off on their invoices, initials or signs off that yes, the work was actually completed, and then it gets to our accounting group and they pay it. And ultimately, when a large area of work is done, notice of completion would be issued. But that's when our work at MCP is really complete and in whole.
My second question was actually that your intention all along was to have these trees removed. You identified early in the beginning of the project that these trees were going to be removed.
It was part of a tree removal permit that we had submitted on September 3rd of last year to the city. Yes. That permit hadn't been issued yet, but we had submitted it for consideration.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Burnett and Don. So I have lots of questions, Don, of you and staff regarding phase 3, the future. But just one I'm going to ask before we go to public comment, and that is kind of an ignorant question perhaps, but theoretically, why don't we just take those 478 trees in phase 3 arborist report that are recommended for removal, or whatever the number is, 458, 478, let's call it 450 just to be simple. Why don't we pull those trees out that are in the way of utilities and other improvements, such as your storm drainage retention galleries, put them in a box in a phased manner, and as soon as the work is done that needs to be done, put them back in the ground as close to the location they were that complies with your need to build what you need.
So there's a number of reasons. You have to look at almost every tree individually, right? Many of the trees are in poor condition. They're infested with insects. They have disease. They need to be removed. You wouldn't call them to be candidates for relocation.
Okay, let's just talk about the fair and good.
So the fair and good, right? So your question is, why don't we just box them all up and set them aside? And so the question there gets down to two things. The first is what we've seen in terms of our success in relocating large trees is not good, right? I think if you talk to biologists generally, or folks that have experience in this area on our site, they would say that for the effort, it's better to plant a new tree, right? And so that's generally been the approach. Now, I guess you can kind of look at trees as a snapshot today versus the life of a tree, or a continuum through time, right? And I know a lot of people try to compare and they say, look, the trees you're planting are these small little trees. Well, yeah. And what ends up happening is those small trees acclimate better to the coastal environment, which we know is quite harsh. And you guys all live in Marina, you know that salt wind blows and the salt fog comes in. It is a tough place. And so, but eventually these trees will grow and get large also. And so, I guess you kind of have to look at it in that perspective, Mayor. And I don't want to trivialize the issue of tree removal. We don't see it that way, right? We're going to do what we can to save as many trees as we can, but we also have a project and a contract with you and the city that says that you'll provide the approvals we need to build the project. And so that's what we're trying to do.
Okay. Thank you very much, Don. All right, so we might have some questions from the public for Don and his team, but for now, let's open the public hearing. I'm not sure if it's a public hearing, just a public discussion on what we've gone over tonight. Phase 2, which is behind us, and phase 3, where they have some trees that we might be able to sort of salvage, and phase 3 that's in front of us, where we're here, there's a tree removal permit pending. So go ahead and raise your hand if you're in the public and you'd like to speak for up to 4 minutes. Let's start with Mike Owen. Good evening, Mike.
Yeah, hi, guys. Almost exactly 2 years ago, 14 May, the Planning Commission unanimously approved clear cutting for the site to west that Downhofer's been talking about, lines of First Avenue. And the standard reason, it was sort of a boilerplate, was one sentence. And it was because of the proximity of the trees to the construction activities of planned streets, building pads, and infrastructure. January 2021, that was another site that's now, when you drive along Second Avenue, you see nothing but dirt. It's been like completely cleared. That came before the Planning Commission, same justification, and it was also for clear cutting, no trees to remove. Earlier in the year, they approved the site north of Imgen Road, where the boutique hotel on Sea Deck Hill is currently located. That wasn't quite clear cutting. They kept 2 trees. As Don Hoffer just said, the line of trees on 6th Avenue, they had planned to remove those. So the conditions at the beginning of March was set up to just clear cut everything in the 3rd phase, rest of the 3rd phase. I mean, Planning Commission had signed off. 2 of the members of the council were on the Planning Commission back then with no questions. And so everything changed when the developer shot himself in the foot and the council raked them over the coals on 5 April with the public joining in. And that really helped the developer focus, as he was talking about, into all the different dimensions in detail, infiltration, tanks for taking in water and everything else. And that led him to come up with actually what you should consider a rejection of clear cutting for the rest of the 3rd phase by a major Fort Ord developer, which is like one of the reasons, out of character, I'm really enthusiastically supporting Shea Holmes' compensation mitigation for this. The 7 trees that were removed, the total diameter breast height is somewhere close to like 450 inches. The reason that's important is that when I was haggling with Jim Perrine, the mayor, in 1996 over the revised tree committee, and we got to the section on compensation, he wouldn't let go of like the way the tree ordinance reads right now and the way that it's implemented as far as mitigation, 2 for 1, 3 for 1, etc. And I wouldn't let go of the verbiage that, as the mayor was indicating, was looking more at an equivalent DBH cost of the actual, size. If a large tree is removed, replace it with a large tree, or equivalent cost of that large tree. And the Carmel City Forester just guesstimated the cost of that 76 diameter breast height tree, that's the largest one on that line of 6, was like $50,000. Jim Perrine was a lot smarter than me, So the compromise he got me to agree with was that the language is in the tree ordinance right now. You don't have to go to a lawyer. You don't have to relook at the tree ordinance. It's in there to compensate like a large DBH tree for equivalent, whether it's a similar tree or equivalent cost. And that's why I'm so excited. Like after 26 years, this is actually being realized, because the trees that were previously, like just rubber stamped for removal on First Avenue, north of 6th Street, are now considered, 8 of them, to replace or take the place as compensation, full-size trees for trees that were like full size that were removed. I mean, so that's like a dream I've had, like, and this is an occasion for it to actually be realized. So like all this talk about like 9 for 1, I mean, the diameter of a 24-inch box tree is like maybe 1 inch at the most. So you're talking about like a 2% comparison between the mass of the canopy for that line of like mature, 450 diameter breast height trees. Am I off?
No, we still hear you, Mike.
Okay, the screen just went off. I mean, so this is like not only a rejection of clear cutting, but it's an involvement of community groups. So like in answer to Christina, it's like,
Yeah, Mike, I think your time is up and that's why they switched screens.
okay.
All right, thank you, Mike. And Guido and Lane, can you co-host me, please?
Sure.
Let's go to Karen Anderson. Go ahead, Karen.
There you go.
Thank you. Yes, so if you would like a list of which members of the public were there, I can give that to you in real time tonight. And additionally, I'd like to say it's always better to preserve existing trees, and I appreciate the change of plans to preserve those trees on Phase 2 West that are north of 6th along First Avenue. And I'm really excited to hear what Kathy Biala had to say about the possibility of a new process going on here regarding saving trees, and to add that I would like to see this process applied to the Cypress Knolls future project. I'd also like to say that the public was too far from those trees on 6th Street to have seen nests before those trees came down, or to see if there were nests in the trees after those trees came down. And let's see, I have some comments regarding Phase 3, if this is an appropriate time. It is, thank you. Yes, we were explained at the public meeting why only 5 trees internal to Phase 3 can be saved, and that did have a lot to do with the practical place to save them would be the linear parks, and the impracticalities were the stormwater capture galleries and in general. And then the business park at the south end of everything, this could be a different phase than Phase 3. It was also mentioned to us that because of how business buildings and parking lots can be laid out differently, because it's still future development, that perhaps more trees up there can be preserved, and that we would all be invited to come on out and help with select trees for that possibility. So I just wanted to say that sounds like great news. Would you like to hear which members of the public were there at the meeting last Monday?
Sure, Karen, it's your time, so you can provide that.
Right, who I was introduced to or who I already knew were Tina Walsh, Jules Vischer, I might have his wrong name, Lisbeth Vischer, Mike Owen, Mike Kennedy, Grace Silva Santella, her husband Ray, and myself. And I really appreciate that we were invited. And there was one other person I wasn't introduced to. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Karen. All right, let's go to Lisbeth. Go ahead, Lisbeth.
Good evening, everybody. About the meeting packet, the date of the memorandum from Guido and Brian is stated as February 21, 2017. Unless some time traveling happened, I think this must be a mistake. And under number 4 in that memo, only trees recommended for removal by the planning department will be removed. Shouldn't this be only trees approved for removal will be removed? Does the planning commission grant approval and city council only gets involved if they wish to appeal a decision? It's hard to believe that it seems that the city has let the developer move dirt and remove trees without signing off on plans and before giving the green light in the field. And it seems that the developer has an issue with keeping at least one of their subcontractors under control. I was glad to see the proposed SOP that hopefully will avoid more, as Don Hover would call it, toe stabbing. Last night, I've sent an email to council to show photos of the arborist report that the planning commission used in May 2020 to decide to recommend removal of the trees on First Avenue. The photos in the report only show the lower part of trees. Looking at a photo of the entire tree gives a much more realistic view of the size and health of trees. And on page 1 of that report, it says that trees cannot be preserved due to conflicts with the location of improvements within phase 2. If, due to those conflicts or grading of approved plans, the only decision that can be made is to approve tree removal requests, because trees can't be retained if they're buried in the ground or if they're hanging in the sky, what is the purpose of the tree removal process and the public's input? Has the city decided the fate of hundreds of trees by approving plans before deciding about valuable trees to be retained? The developer cannot be blamed for doing their work when their plans have been approved by the city. It is great that MCP has agreed to retain trees at First Avenue, for which they already had received a removal permit. They are open into looking at other trees that might be able to be saved. I am especially thinking about 1353, the drone tree. I hope that they can look closer into this specific tree because it seems to be located just outside the future east-west linear park. Maybe a curb can be adjusted to save that one tree. I really liked hearing Don Hover speak about how the team is looking into retaining as many trees as possible on First Avenue by adjusting sidewalks and park strips. Question, what warranty will or can the city require from the developer for new and transplanted trees? Going forward, I hope that never again will the fate of trees be determined by a report with such bad photos of trees, many of which are large and healthy. And I'd like to thank the developer and the city for working together to find solutions and to do better in the future. I'm already looking forward to plans for Cypress Knolls, where the city hopefully will start with looking at the existing trees and the terrain and design plans with that as the basis instead of as an afterthought. That will avoid the issues that we are currently facing and will result in beautiful, healthy trees integrated in a new development. For the dunes, I'm glad that MCP and the city are looking into which trees still can be saved within already approved plans, and I'm looking forward to being involved as a concerned resident. Thank you. Well, I didn't time myself, but I did well. Thank you all very much for working on this.
Thank you, Elizabeth, very much. Okay, let's go to Grace Silva Santella. Go ahead, Grace, when you're ready.
Can you hear me okay, Mayor Delgado and Council?
Yes.
So first I'll agree with Mike Owen. We've come a long, long ways, and it's a good moment for Marina that we are looking at mediating the illegal removal of some mature, beautiful cypress trees by retaining some mature cypress trees that had been originally approved for removal. So I want to thank the developer that they are looking at those that stretch of cypress that are north on First Avenue. But I will also say that for me, I do not want to see tree preservation in Phase 3 West to be in any way negotiated as part of the remediation for the illegal tree removals that occurred on, I'm sorry, I'm blank on the date. So I'm glad to see that we have, 8 cypress that are being considered for preservation, but what the developers shared with us at the May 2nd meeting, which is a total of 5 trees in the interior of Phase 3 West for preservation only, no more than 5 trees in the interior. I hope that we can work towards a lot more trees than just 5 in the interior of Phase 3 West. I'm going to be all over the place a little bit here, so I apologize. I was a little shocked to hear Guido speak about a disconnect that's occurring between what sounded to me like Public Works and Planning Department. Clearly, this needs to be rectified. Secondly, I want to thank the mayor for sharing with us the meeting that he and Councilmember Viala had, where they were shared information from Marina Coast Water District that said that the asbestos pipes did not have to be removed, but could have been capped. Thirdly, I take question with the arborist reports that the majority of the trees are defined as fair. I spoke with Patrick, the arborist, during that May 2nd meeting, and he explained to me that fair is often used as a description for a tree that may actually be in really good condition, or may be in fact only considered fair, because I questioned to him some cypress trees I was seeing as described as fair that were in fact really good. And one photo that Ray took of one of the trees that was illegally removed, we think it might have been tree 1386, is actually absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, and excellent. It is only considered fair in the arborist report. I would also agree with the developer that we need to have some really good substantial protection for any trees going forward. And I hope that we learn from this, because Cypress Knolls has some beautiful trees in that stretch. And also I'm quite concerned about the eucalyptus trees on the crest of the hillside behind the future hotel location. And I hope that because eucalyptus are not considered as protected species trees, that doesn't mean we're going to lose those trees in that site. And I apologize that went off topic just a bit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grace. And now we'll go to Tommy Bolea. Hello, Tommy.
Good evening. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we definitely need to use cypress knolls as the next true model of innovation as far as saving trees, as much as we can, of course. Trimming them, having a tree staff that actually can trim trees. We need a tree committee, but it's ongoing. Trees need to be trimmed all the time. We don't want to do what they did at East Garrison, took out all those oak trees, and now it's all housing. Well, we don't want to do that at Cypress Knolls. Now, come on now. We know there's money to be made in new housing and development, but we got to all work together. I don't know if we need police or some type of supervision on these contractors or developers. I mean, if we just can't let them pull the trigger. And on regards to somebody saying on the last meeting that somebody was mentioning mice or rats chewed on wires. Well, obviously, if there's no tree and there's no bird on that tree, the bird won't go after the mice. You'll have a huge problem. See how it all works? When you mention a problem and you take down a tree, you're creating the problem. You got to have all of nature working. That's what gives us life today. I don't know how much more I can say, except all the cypress trees in Marina should be saved. I know they're not native. I don't think nothing in Marina other than the species that you talk about. But if we took all the ice plant out, we would have a huge fire problem. Those would be tall grasses and no access for fire. So in one way, they're doing one thing, but it's not native, and we want to get rid of it. It blooms flowers. It has fall foliage. There's so many advantages, and the sand erosion, the wind.
All right, Tommy, to interrupt, but we're not talking about the ice plant right now. We're talking
Okay,
about the tree removal permit.
trees. We need to prune those trees, see which ones can be saved and which ones obviously cannot. I mean, go look at the one at Food Corral, the old Food Corral in Carmel. It's a perfect example. It's a beacon of hope and future prosperity in Marina. I mean, we need to just set an agenda here and have it part of the development. Am I stopping the development? No, we're thinking ahead. We're going to think on the next project. You know, we're just going to have to work closer together. I mean, those trees provide oxygen, and you take all those trees out, yeah, you can replant, but a tree doesn't grow overnight, especially oak trees. To me, oak trees are in the east, cypress trees are in the west. Go look at Carmel. They take care of, they have pride. I mean, pride in their trees. But on this new development, cypress knolls and any of the new ones, yeah, some trees have to go, but working with the public, having meetings, I'll be more than happy to voice my opinion or be part of some decision-making process. But if you don't want the community involved, I can understand. You're rushing to get the project done because there's money to be made, taxes, investments. I understand all that, but you know what? It's just a very sensitive matter. And I know we're going through this thing in Zoom and it's making things much more difficult. And the decisions that you guys are making are much faster than what the city can handle, obviously, because I hear it all the time. We don't have staffing to do or trim trees or whatever. Well, that's got to be part of the project. That's how you budget. You budgeted to remove the barracks. Now you got a budget to help with the trees.
Thank you, Tommy.
I mean, thank you.
Okay, take care, Tommy.
Yep.
All right, we're going to go to Steve Emerson. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening. Just a few things that I think I'm observing this evening is one, I want to thank Guido and I want to thank Dawn for their staff and working together in recognizing the fact that there were policy issues on both sides that needed to be addressed. And it looks like they are. Certainly the new SOP for the city. I think that communication and working together on that, I think, is a huge piece to the puzzle. And it also goes back to how this happened to begin with. And I can't lose sight of the fact that there were issues on all sides, and including MCWD. And I think I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, as Don said, he cannot sell a property with an asbestos pipe underneath. So whether that pipe could be capped or not is irrelevant to the question. That area is designated to be sold for housing. You can't sell that. So that tree or that pipe did have to be removed one way or the other. Obviously, it had already been applied for the permit. There's all sorts of issues there. So I don't think the idea here is to go out for trying to get a pound of flesh. The idea is recognize that there were issues on all sides, continue to work together. I think Don had really walked through all the different things that they would like to do to try to keep this from ever happening again. The city is making changes on their own policies to try to keep this from happening. Replacing trees, saving additional trees. I think you're all here. I think you got what this resulted in an improvement of a process. And I think that in that realm, it's a positive for everybody across the board. So I'm hoping that kind of puts this the issue to bed, but also looking ahead to phase 3 and the issues there, keeping in mind that you're changing policies and you're communicating and working together. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Okay, we'll give everyone a moment who hasn't spoken to raise your hand if you still would like to speak. We'll close public comment, go to questions. What is the accurate way to look at this? Does the Planning Commission approve tree removal permits or recommend regarding those?
Yeah, the code here is written rather uniquely. The Planning Commission would make a recommendation to me as the director. So that's how I haven't seen that, but that's what I'm using here in Marina. So
okay. And just to clarify that Elizabeth did point out that the first memo is April 17th, 2022, not 2021. Is that correct? Or not 2017?
Yeah, I did not do any time travel. I forgot to change the date on that memo. So yes. So.
Then a little bit hypothetical, I'm not sure that's the right word, but what is the purpose of the permit process if it's a no-brainer that all the trees being requested are going to be removed? It's kind of a hypothetical question. So can you discuss the purpose of the tree removal permit process, Guido?
I mean, the purpose of the ordinance is to, implement the municipal code to try to preserve as many trees as reasonably possible, to implement the specific plan. It is a rather unique project. It's a pretty large site. There are multiple agreements that bind the city with the applicant, so it's not as clear cut as straight out of the Muni Code. So yeah, it is definitely a interesting project to work on, and yeah, there's a lot of different layers to the project. So
all right, Guido, I'm glad we have you to navigate through those layers. And the last question I wrote down, Guido, was what warranty time of period, I think she means, what warranty is involved with newly planted trees or relocated trees?
Warranty, I'm not, in terms of
how long does the developer have to ensure they're healthy before the city takes control?
The public works director, I believe, is on the phone. I'd have to punt to Brian in terms of the street trees, or in terms of when we would. I mean, usually a final map's approved, and there's usually a period of 2 to 3 years in terms of before we accept dedication. But I'd have to punt to Brian on that question. So.
Yeah, I would say a lot of the landscaping in the Dunes development itself is actually HOA maintained, or are maintained through CFDs. So that's one aspect of this development that continues on.
So Brian, the 6-to-1 trees or the 2-to-1 trees, depending on the ratio used for different reasons, in phase 3 and phase 2 that we're talking about tonight, those trees would be planted by the developer and then turned over to the maintenance of the HOA or the CFD, the Community Facilities District?
Yeah, with the exception, there are some exceptions along 2nd Avenue and 9th Street, but for the most part, they are in the CFD and maintained by the HOA going forward.
Okay, and so to get to the question, in the case of the CFD taking over Community Facilities District, how long do the developers need to take care of them before they turn them over to basically private hands?
I don't know, maybe Don can maybe answer that one. I think, they have to finish out all that phase and all that stuff getting turned over, but.
Generally, I'll jump in here real quick. Thanks, Brian. Generally, there are 3 areas that we plant landscaping in. One of them would be a private lot. The other would be within an area that is maintained by the homeowners association. And then the last would be public right of way or parks that the city maintains. Generally, when we install trees, they come with a 90-day maintenance period and a 1-year warranty by the installing contractor. So if the tree fails in the first year, the nursery and the installing contractor would replace it. Sometimes we have to pay labor for that. And it always gets into sort of a pointing the fingers as to, was it maintained properly? Was it irrigated? You know, these kinds of things. I think the question though tonight had to do with these large trees and preserving existing trees. And I just want to point out, you know, there is a balance here also of utilities. And when we look at even these trees along First Avenue, what I hope people understand is that there is a tremendous amount of utility work going on at First Avenue where we're replacing utilities. And the tree root zone will be impacted. Right now, it's generally held, and we just were talking through this the other day, so these numbers are, you know, sort of front of mind, that the cypress trees are pretty hardy. You can impact the roots, maybe up to 40% of the roots, and they will still likely survive. But this is the conundrum, right? If we commit to save trees, yet we have to put in utilities, or we have to put retaining walls to, you know, put slopes around these trees to be able to save them, you know, we're always sort of walking that fine line and hoping that it all works. We're going to do our best, you know, and I think you've seen that, but it's not always perfect. And some trees, you know, don't perform quite as well as others.
All right, Don, for the public right-of-way trees that you turn over to the city as one of your 3 examples, is it the installation company's warranty that's the only warranty, and then the city has to take care of them after that 90-day to 1-year period?
Yeah, I think so, if I'm understanding your question correctly. Again, it sort of depends on the landscaping, Mayor. So let's say, you know, when we turn a landscape parcel over, so we build it, we maintain it for a period of time, and then we go through an acceptance process with the city. Let's say it's a city park. Generally, from that point forward, the city would be responsible for those trees in that parcel, right? Or that land.
At what time frame? Is it a year or 2 years?
It's at the turnover point, and you know that could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months, something like that. It just sort of depends on the process and how long it's taken us to construct the site. A lot of times a tree will get planted, right? And then it's not for several months after that that the parcel is finally complete. You know, all the planning's done, we've walked it, we've done the punch list. It might be 6 or 8 months before that finally gets turned over to the city. And then from there on, it would be the city's responsibility. And we're always going to do our best to work with you guys if there's a problem, but that's generally how it works.
All right, thank you, Don. Did anyone note any questions that I overlooked? Those are all that I had written down in public. Okay. So now let's go back to council, and I'd like to kind of wrap up the past before we start talking about phase 3 future. And there is some overlap because phase 3 could be used to compensate for trees lost in phase 2. So are there any comments, questions left over on anyone's part regarding the 7 trees and what we do about the compensation for those? We'll go to Mayor Pro Tem Kathy Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that Don Hofer has done a really good job really articulating the constraints involved in tree removal, but also tree maintenance. And I commend him for wanting to preserve as many trees as he possibly can, given the circumstances. I think all of us have learned a tremendous amount about the issue of trees that we actually hadn't thought of before. And I think that MCP has done a good faith effort in doing a lot of things to rectify the error that was made. And speaking to that, I don't think we're going to need to go to an administrative hearing or a notice of default. I just think that, you know, that there has been so much good work that has been done. Speaking to that, however, I do think that I have had my eyes opened, and I think everyone else has too, that when Don Hofer showed the chart that listed the 7 trees, and then it said on the far right hand, remove, and these were documented by the arborist as being fair. I think I was a little unnerved by Grace Silva Santana's comment about what a poor condition actually means. However, on that chart, I think we rely too much on that kind of arborist judgments about whether something is good condition, fair condition, or poor condition, and that we immediately make assumptions about that rating that justify removal of the tree. And what I would like to see in the future is that when we talk about tree removals, that we have maybe a checklist that not only lists the health of the tree from the arborist perspective, but we've all been talking about so many other things. Don Hover says the asbestos and cement pipes, the infrastructure underneath it, that it was a private lot versus a public right of way. We've heard from Lane about the gradients, the utility infrastructure, whether it's the individual character of a heritage tree, or Don Hover says about the storm drainage, or somebody mentioned too near the streets. So there's a number of things that I would like to see when we consider trees, that we have a checklist so we know right away, this is slated for removal because it's in the specific plan. It's a no-brainer, it just is. But on the same token, maybe that tree can still be part of a consideration of preservation, but at least we know the reason as the primary reason, and then we go from there, because it's just very hard. I know I've been part of, in the Planning Commission, decisions about tree removal, and it's reduced to simplicity. And what we found in this process is that there are many ways to look at this, and not that some things won't change, but at least we know upfront. And so I would recommend that. And the other thing in terms of the mitigation factors, I know we've covered a lot, but I would like to consider the fact that the city is either getting an inspector or asking the planning staff to do a bit more in oversight. And I just don't know whether we have the resources to do that yet. And so maybe one of the things, maybe not so much looking at this as a fine per se, but maybe the developer can help us support that kind of additional services. And I know they have some plans on their side too, but I wonder if it's possible to add that kind of additional support for city resources that unfortunately right now we don't have a lot of. That's all my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Kathy. Let's go to Councilmember David Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to believe that MCP is remorseful and regrets the outcomes. However, this is not the first incident, and it has become, I think, a cost of business for them. The developer has referred to them stubbing a toe, and whenever I hear that, it grates on me, because it wasn't a toe; it was the community that was harmed. The trees, fair condition, poor condition, good condition, is irrelevant, I believe, because the process says if you plan to remove a tree, you will notify the city, and we will review your application and verify that, in fact, due to several conditions, that tree can be removed. Now, there are conditions of environment, there are conditions of supporting the tree cover for the city. There are many things that are not necessarily in the that would help the developer in our consideration, but and they shouldn't be. They are things that the citizens of Marina have decided this is important. The cover, the type, the placement, all of that is within the purview of the citizens as entrusted to our planning department and to our planning commission and to our soon to be revived, I guess, tree committee of some manner. So I think and it's not necessarily punitive, but I think an extreme penalty is in order here, because obviously the procedures that were put in place after the first incident were insufficient, because it didn't matter. Well, if we take out some trees, we'll just say we're sorry and we'll plant an extra tree and everything will be fine. That's just not good enough. I'm sorry. There have been other issues that we've had with the developer as it related to affordable housing, how the project would, connect with the larger city. And we have not met with, I felt, a reasonable, good faith, good neighbor response. So I understand what Mayor Pro Tem has said, but I don't find the good faith there. I see continued what's best for our interests, what's best for the business interests being the guiding principle. And we as council have an obligation to our citizens to represent them and protect their interests. And so if they've decided that trees are important, and I think we've heard that over and over and over again, we have an obligation to respect that wish and do whatever we can. So my recommendation is that an administrative hearing might be considered, and maybe on our next, at some future meeting, we might get a report from staff as to what the format of that might be, or what the extent might be. We've trusted our partner before. They've assured us that what happened the first time was completely accidental and completely unpreventable. And once again, it has happened. The instructions, verbal instructions to a contractor, written instructions to a contractor, just defining, detailing a scope of work, and yet the contractor, who I assume is competent, read those instructions, listened to those instructions, and decided this is what needed to be done. I don't think that is how business is done. I think the mayor at the beginning of this indicated that the removal, accidental removal, as opposed to the intentional removal, just seems to call out to me that this was the plan all along, and there was no intent to inform the city or to follow what our preferences are. So that's my recommendation, that at least we have a discussion of what this administrative hearing might be. But failing that, and I don't think there's much support for that, I think that we should go again for the maximum of the 6-tree reimbursement or replenishment of the trees that were taken down. And those are my comments.
Thank you very much, David. Let's go to Councilmember Christina Medina Dirksen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hofer, and thank you, everybody. We have 19 attendees who are here today. So the image of downed trees along a dirt road, as if they're carelessly an afterthought, I think burns in all of our brains as something that is very sad. We know their value, they're valuable. And I think that'll stick with us for a while. But I have to say that I don't agree that any of this was intentional. In life, we make mistakes, and sometimes there are things beyond us that we cannot control. I know that what I've heard from Mr. Hofer and the team is they responded, they fired a superintendent, they've made some, I'm not going to call them concessions, but they've come to the table with a mea culpa. They sat with our Mr. Owens and the concerned citizens. And to hear Mr. Owens actually be a little gleeful that we're moving forward, there was conversations. I'm willing to believe that it was not intentional and that they have, in fact, recognized our community's response and are willing to be and have taken responsibility. So with that, I am a person who likes to find facts. And in this case, I cannot find that there was one party completely at fault. Yes, trees were taken out. Have we determined that at the end of the day, I know there's a process, and I'm not going to say that it's irrelevant, but I'm feeling that as a person who is concerned about the health and safety of workers, if they were laden with asbestos and those trees were in fair to declining condition, I'm prone to think that, yeah, they were planning to come out anyways. It's just extremely unfortunate the way that this came through. So I am willing to accept the mea culpa and feel quite like Mr. Owens does. I'm not going to say relieved, but quite impressed that the community can come together with developers. And I don't believe all developers are bad. We have to work with our partners that are our developers. And I'm satisfied that it was not intentional. The trees, despite the process that occurred, were going to come out. And if they hadn't, perhaps, the asbestos is what I worry about. So I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Biala. This is an incredible learning experience for us. We've had community listening to us. And I'm finding that I'm satisfied with the mitigation plan that has been offered by community partners and willing to work a lot closer and recognize our as well as our city's responsibility in it, that, I'm not sure I'm not throwing any staff under the bus, but I think we can all agree that we're on better alert now and understanding what we need to work better together. And that comes back to us too. And I think we need to take responsibility in some ways that and this is glaring, we need the staff support to be able to be on top of these things and know the policies and set a clear policy. Actually, not know the policies, but set a clear policy so that this does not happen again. Again, Mayor Pro Tem Biala mentioned that this is a good practice run, unfortunate practice run for the next developments that are coming our way, and that would be Cypress Knolls, however that looks, and also Marina Station, however that looks. So I disagree with Mr. Burnett. I don't find this to be that this is a punitive administrative hearing necessitates that. So that's what I have to say, and I appreciate all the parties coming together to talk about this in tonight's session.
Thank you, Christina. The mention of 1,000+ trees to be planted and eventually turned over to either the city or the residents, or the HOA via their community facilities district, and the fact that we allocated $300,000 for the next 2 years to employ an arborist. To me, it's never too soon at this point to have an arborist, so that those 1,000 trees have somebody looking after them with some expertise. And that's just this project. We know that we're going to have parks and we're going to have cypress knolls, and we already have trees that are failing along the high school access point. We definitely need an arborist, and we have money allocated to do that. So I hope that we are moving ahead with that arborist. We're going to be in a lot better shape to have staff on our own that has the expertise of an arborist. Can you go, Guido, please, to the Exhibit 3, where we talk about tentative maps and what gives the developers the rights to remove Phase 3 trees. So I'm looking at D, E, and F paragraphs on the April 25th, 2022 memo on page 3 of that memo, where we have paragraphs D, E, and F. Can you share the screen, please?
One second, Mayor. I'm trying to pull up the.
Okay, so while you're pulling it up, I'll just mention that in our staff report, it mentions that phase 3 includes 255 single-family homes, an art district, a 400,000 square foot business park, and a 10,000 square foot retail area. So those are what's going to happen in phase 3 if it all goes according to plan. And it has to be, as we've heard today, it has to be graded, it has to be utility provided. And this is all disturbance to the surface. It's dotted with 478 trees that are hoped, in a tree removal permit to be removed, with almost every single one of them coming down, except for maybe 5 or some small number. I was a little confused. We heard the number 19, we heard the number 24, we heard the number 5, but compare those numbers to 478 trees in phase 3 arborist report, and you can understand it's almost 100% clear cut. And so when you look at on the screen, when you look at paragraph D, what documents have been approved giving developer the rights to build structures or roads in phase 3 locations? And the answer is the phase 3 tentative map is scheduled to appear before the Planning Commission in late May. So my question to staff is, if there is no tentative map yet approved, then basically, what are the rights of the city to work with the developer to protect and or relocate healthy trees?
I mean, that's absolutely within the city's right. But keep in mind that, the applicant does have a development agreement, a specific plan, and an operating agreement with the city. So there is some give and take there, but absolutely, we try to preserve as many trees as possible. So.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And then paragraph E, what documents have been approved, giving developer the rights to remove phase 3 trees. No approvals have been granted for the phase 3 tentative map. Kind of repeats the answer in the paragraph above it. Paragraph F, what rights does the city have to require certain trees thought to be iconic or beneficial to the community to be retained? Answer, the city retains its authority under the Marina Municipal Code and the University Village specific plan to retain as many trees as possible. And so it seems to me that there's a huge gray area, or maybe not, as many trees as possible. So the city wants to use its authority, perhaps, to retain as many trees as possible. Who determines possible? What does that mean in the context of phase 3 tentative map application coming in the near future this month?
I could answer that. That's the Planning Commission. So within what the rights that they have, that the Dunes will have under their specific plan and their agreements, that'll go to the Planning Commission, and they will look at that from the lens of, if they want to retain as many trees as possible, that is the lens that they will look at it.
Lane, you have a lot of experience, and Guido, you have a lot of experience. So we don't yet have a tentative map for phase 3. So my basic layperson question is, how far can you go in requiring trees to be kept? A good number of trees to be kept and be within the legal, moral, ethical, framework.
Yeah, I would say we have to be careful in this conversation because here in Marina, the tentative map ends up back at the city council's lap. The Planning Commission hasn't given its recommendation. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Mayor. We will work with the applicant to retain as many trees as possible, but in fairness, in terms of having an equitable public hearing, we have to be careful that, you know, this is going to come back in your lap as the final legislative body. So I understand what you're saying, Mayor, but we just have to be conscious
Right.
that the tentative map itself is not on the agenda for tonight, and we want to be fair and equitable to the applicant. So
Right. So being fair, I'm trying to get everybody on the same page because I don't know the answer. I'm not directing what we should do. I'm asking what the sideboards are. Take it away from the dune. When we go to Cypress Knolls and there's a tentative map involved, how far can the city go in Cypress Knolls to help direct which trees to keep and which trees not to keep before a tentative map is approved?
yeah, the city manager's been at this project a lot longer. I can only answer that, you know, we have to follow the municipal code. We have to follow the specific plan. There is a development agreement the applicant has, so he does have some rights in terms of being able to build, you know, the project in a reasonable time frame. So that's what, as a staff member, I'm bound by, but I'm not sure if the city manager also wants to comment. So.
Well, and yeah, Cypress Knolls is very different from the dunes in that the city completely owns Cypress Knolls. And so way before we get to any tentative map or anything with Cypress Knolls, those are decisions the city council can make way up front versus the dunes. They've already gone through a very contractual process, as Guido pointed out, 70 some public hearings for approving the specific plan that laid out these guidelines, various development agreements that laid out the guidelines, other maps, other documents, legal documents that have been approved. And I would also say it is so variable per site. So phase 1 of the dunes is very different from phase 2. It's very different from phase 3. That Cypress Knolls is going to be hugely different from any of those. It really depends. But I guess to answer your question, Cypress Knolls is very different. City owns it. City can control everything in that process.
Okay, it's frustrating for me because there's different reasons why we can't have a frank discussion so that we all learn together what it means to have the documents in hand that have been approved and what it means that we don't yet have a tentative map. And it's like, we can't get that answer because it might tie our hands because we might consider this in the future. But, we'll move on and let's go down just a little bit where you are now, showing tree 920, just at the bottom of your screen, move that up. So I just want everyone to get on the same page because we, the council, didn't go on a tour. So we know the least about this. But basically, tree 920 is a cypress tree. It's pictured there on the right. And as someone, I think it was Elizabeth, said, doesn't look like a very good tree. You're looking at the bottom part of the tree that's more stem than branch, or more trunk than leaves, more trunk than branches. But when you're in person, you're looking at that tree, it's a large, beautiful, healthy tree. It's considered fair, but it probably has 0 insect infestation that's going to have any impact on it. It's a healthy tree with a long life ahead of it. And it looks in this picture as like, oh, it's kind of ugly. But this is what we have to go on. And so when you have 478 of these trees photographed with pictures like this and very little information to go on, especially hearing that fair actually might mean very good, but it gets a rating of fair. That's what Grace related anyway. So the recommendation is to remove this tree. And as Kathy said, Mayor Pro Tem Viala, why? Is it the road? Is it the utilities? Is it the proximity to the building that has to be deconstructed? Can this tree be relocated? Can it be trimmed and relocated? How do we ask all these questions for 478 trees? But when you walk through this neighborhood, and I think most of the council has not yet done that, what you see is a grove of large, beautiful trees of different species. And when a person who cares about trees considers clear cutting all but 5 or 19 or 24 of those 478 trees, you just ask why. And you wonder if other cities would do it that way. And some would, and some wouldn't. can we scroll down to the next one? We'll just do two more examples. So this again is a large cypress tree, number 923. It says fair health, recommended for removal. Again, it doesn't do justice, this photo, to this tree, but it's a tree that you could see from a quarter mile away. It's a very large tree. And it's going to be removed once it gets permission from the Planning Commission, with very little attention given to this tree because it's among 478 trees. There's no way the Planning Commission can give this tree its due consideration because they're considering 478 at the same time. So in a swoosh, we give approval with very little individual attention, and each one of these trees is, 40 to 80 or more years old, and they're all getting cut down at once for reasons that collectively we really don't understand on an individual basis. So we can go through every one of these trees, and we would have a similar discussions. And I'm not sure how to proceed, but I think it would be wonderful if the council had a city council meeting, because that's what's needed to avoid Brown Act violations. And we had a similar tour with residents and developer representatives and the arborist, and we say, why this tree? What's in the way? Why does this need to go? Can this be relocated? And once it's dug up, if it is to be relocated, where can it be put nearby where it was? So maybe we get a relocation program going and not, as Mike Owen refers to it, a clear cutting operation going. The last thing I want to say is that the standards and procedures, and you can stop sharing if you like, Lee, the SOPs that Guidi has recommended, they look really good. And we probably need time to consider additions or deletions to those SOPs, but it's a little surprising that we don't have SOPs, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that we need good SOPs, and Guido has begun that path, and the developer is agreeing that they've seen his draft and they like that. They like where he's going. So apparently it's a reasonable set of guidelines that Guido's coming up with. All right, so where do we go from here, Council? Why don't we talk about our next steps? Go ahead, Christina.
Well, at this point, are we not taking any formal action, so we wouldn't need a motion, is that right?
Right, we can give staff direction on where we think we need to go next. Whether it's hearings, as Councilmember Burnett suggests, or a tour, what I suggest, or whatever it might be.
I think you make a lot of sense there with the tour, because once you're in the grove of those trees and recognizing their needs and where they stand, there is that lack of perception, the feeling of it that is missing from this discussion. So I would support your next steps of another meeting after having gone through, experienced the groves, not to decide this matter, but to move forward with our standard operating procedures to make some policy on this, on the matter, on the tree matter.
Okay.
It was some input from the tree committee, for sure.
Which doesn't exist.
Okay. Well, then maybe is there room to bring that back, since clearly we have community concern and people that have weighed in, have taken the time to weigh in. I mean, why not?
Yeah, so let's get an update on that. Lane, the ability to launch the tree committee anew and the relevance and the good and bad of that. Can you speak to the status?
Yeah, well, we can certainly bring that back and put on a council agenda if we want to do that. I wanted to clarify one of the things. On that May 2nd meeting, we did not do a tour of the site at all. We all met in the trailer out at the dunes, and the group felt it was far more productive to be in there to look at the maps and have a discussion. And so we never actually went out and toured the site. Plus, it was really windy, as a really windy day. So we didn't do any tours. I wanted to clarify that point. What we had talked about with that group was to continue to meet with the dunes, and perhaps they had asked them to without trespassing on the site to look at the trees. They're interested possibly in phase 3 in preserving and continuing that discussion with the dunes. And so the dunes had indicated they're willing to continue to have those meetings and discussions with that group. And that group is primarily composed of a lot of your tree committee people anyway. So that's where things are left with that group and the dunes.
Then, Mr. Mayor, then perhaps we just move forward then with, if it's motion time, to adopt the staff recommendations and then move forward with some next steps to create stronger policies.
Okay, I'll second that to start. I think that it would be helpful if the motion gave some specific direction, like one, that staff comes back to us with options they see reasonably to compensate for the 7 trees lost. And of course, that would come after discussions they have with staff. But let us, the council, hear specific options to choose from that staff and developers think would compensate for those 7 trees that were recently cut down at the north end of phase 3 without permit. And number 2, that the council have a chance to walk through the site to get familiar with the process in situ. That is, what are some of these trees? What do they look like? Why do they need to come down? What are the options of moving them? But having a site visit, I've had one impromptu with a few residents, and it was extremely helpful. So I was disappointed we weren't invited to the next one, but I hope that we are invited to the next one. So the second one after the options for compensation would be walking phase 3 with the council so that we have a better idea of what's going on with the process. And then beyond that, that we take a look at Guido's SOP in a manner which we could actually make some comments on and try to get that going. So that's a third thing. And then the fourth one would be hearing and possibly approving all of the changes that staff has been talking about making on our end, and hear what the developers have been talking about making on their end, so that we have the right staff in place when needed. So we've got the options of compensation, we've got the site tour, we have the SOPs, and then we have the changed procedures as staff, who's going to be on which side doing what, that Lane has talked about and Don has talked about. So those are 4 specific directions that seem to be in the realm of what our next steps can be. So I'll just let those hang out there, and we'll go to Councilmember Berkeley.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions for clarification here, because we've had a lot of conversation and we've gone all over the map on this topic. My understanding was that the staff report, for example, including the 6-to-1 mitigation, this was something that was decided between the city, the community members who participated, and the developer. Am I correct on that?
Lane, you want to take that?
The 6-to-1 mitigation is actually required by our code for trees that are removed that are not permitted. So that's not something we came up with. That's a code requirement.
Okay, so if that's our policy at this point in time, it seems like we should be following that and then moving forward. I understand where Councilmember Burnett was going about sort of, really having an examination of what occurred. I will say there's a part of me that feels the same. With that stated, I don't think that that's going to really accomplish anything. I think that we need to look at how are we moving forward as a city, and how are we going to work further with the developers to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. And so I'm thinking about if our policy is 6-to-1 trees, then that's what we should be honoring. And as a just point of reference, it's not that I'm anti-trees or anything like that. That's not where I'm coming from. I'm just looking at what we're spending time on in our city. And I agree that we should be also looking at coming up with a new policy for if this should ever happen again. I really agree with that. But I don't know that there's really a way to fully compensate for mistakes made. And we have so many other things on our plate as a city. I mean, in our last meeting, we just talked about 120 issues that we're trying to resolve. And we've spent a lot of time on this already. There was a terrible, terrible mistake that was made. And the developers, we're trying to hold them accountable. As it is, my understanding is we've also put some time delay in their intended process. That's also not beneficial for them. So I'm not sure that we really need to continue with everything that was just laid out. So those are my comments for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Let's go to Mayor Pro Tem Biala.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I like the details of your resolution and your recommendations. On the first issue of the 7 removed trees, I do agree that we should have it come back to council about all the things that have already been stipulated by the developer and the city, and even further ones. And I suggested some additional help on our end from the developer to get, the arborist function or the inspection functions or whatever we have recommended, and also the SOPs and all of that. I think, those are going to be nice to see all in one place, all the recommendations of mitigations and reparations, so to speak. So I think that that's a very good, resolution. On this part, as well as the 480 trees in phase 3, I need to know if we are going against some timelines for the developer. I think we should know whether any of these recommendations that we're proposing today is going to impact some part of the timelines for them. And on the 480 trees, I think I would be completely overwhelmed by a tour of 480 plus trees. I think before we even consider that, we should have sort of a more robust list of the trees, other than just their health of the trees, but including all of the reasons for particular recommendations for removal or maintenance, so that we have a much better list, and that be shared with the Planning Commission. I think that for us, that we should wait before we tour until the planning commissioners have had their say, and then we move at the next level for us to be more educated about the trees with a better list and more information to help us guide those decisions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You're muted.
Thank you, Kathy. Lane, if the Planning Commission approves a tree removal permit for 478 trees, does it go to council?
No.
Okay. All right, let's go to Christina Medina Dirksen.
I didn't realize I still had my hand up, but does Mr. Burnett like to speak? If not, I'll jump in and just say I appreciate the reasonableness of Councilmember Berkeley. She's spot on. She has recognized that we do have a lot of priorities, and has recognized that we need policies. We cannot hold our we can't hold others to a standard when our own policies are flawed. So I will stand with what you recommend, what the recommendations that are on the table, but I will adjust to say that I do I'm good with the 6-to-1 compensation on the trees.
The concerns that the public had when Hilltop Park had its incident, and the concerns that the public has when we had the recent incident here at the north end of phase 3 were because they saw these trees before they were cut down, and they were highly concerned that they were cut down. And so they're looking for compensation that's beside the city ordinance, where we put 6 relatively twiggy plants in the ground, where we lost these matriarch trees. And the developer has identified trees they have permission to remove that they can keep in compensation for those trees that they removed that maybe shouldn't have been. And so we have a chance. We're on the precipice of getting large trees retained in compensation for the trees that were large and removed. So to go and to just go 6-1, cut down all those other trees on First Avenue, we should take a look at those trees on First Avenue. Most people that see those trees on First Avenue that are approved for removal would say, wow, if there's any way you could keep those beautiful trees, that's going to add to your city, your neighborhood, your vista. If you were to take those down, it would be very unfortunate. So we're at the cusp of maybe being able to save some of those in compensation. So yeah, I'm not against the 6-1, but I don't think that solves the problem of trust and community loss. It only solves the problem of black and white, what the paperwork says. And we do need to address what the policy is. But if there's discretion amongst the city and the developer to bilaterally agree to a better compensation than 6 little trees for every giant that was removed, let's do it, because that's in the best interest of our community. And the site tour, if the Planning Commission is going to hear this on May 26th, we need a site tour before then. And I would suggest the Planning Commission be on the site tour, because we can't be making decisions from the office based on paperwork that affect 478 trees, many of which are large, beautiful trees that themselves create a neighborhood, a natural neighborhood of trees. And we're talking, as Mike Owen said, basically he's correct. We're talking about clear cutting, probably the best forest of trees. It may be even better than Cypress Knolls, but it's on the same scale. It's in the same league. And we don't quite, at least I don't quite yet understand where the push and shove is with a tentative map that doesn't exist, but we have a specific plan and a DDA, development disposition agreement, that does exist. But we heard today that we didn't really get answers to those questions. So we at City Council don't really know how far we can go to try to protect trees. And I would guess the Planning Commission may not either. So we're about to go somewhat blinded down a path in a couple of weeks to say yes to cut down up to 478 trees. And very few of us have even seen the trees. It just doesn't seem like a very good way of deciding the fate of an urban forest. I mean, trees are pretty spectacular. And I'm not a fan of eucalyptus or cypress trees. I've always said, they're only good dead. They're not native. Let's get rid of them and replace them with oaks. But so close to the ocean, these oaks don't grow very well. And so we're not going to have oaks replace these pines and these cypress and even these eucalyptus, which are the scourge of my existence. But these are pretty trees, and they're big trees, and they have value, and they're attracting birds and butterflies, and they're beautiful from the vista. The people at the dunes, who are our constituents, they look toward the beach and they see all these trees, and they say, if you cut down these trees, you cut down our vista, you cut down the quality of our life. And so without even seeing those trees, because we don't have time to take a walk and look at them and understand our process, like I think Christina, you were mentioning, and Kathy was mentioning, we need more information than fair or good. And it doesn't even matter if they're fair or good. If they're good or they're fair, they're all recommended to be cut down. So what's the point of fair or good if we're going to cut them all down? But we need more information about, why is that tree getting cut down? Can it be saved? Can it be relocated? Okay, we've got 3 people with hands up. Christina, let's go to you next.
Sorry, Kathy.
I think you're muted, Christina.
Sorry, Kathy, let me just, Mayor Pro Tem jump in. We can also see if that 6-1 would also include any trees to be saved. But I quite frankly am not an arborist. I, on a surface, see trees all the time, and I'm not sure. I'm not in a position to make any determination of superseding what an arborist would say. I am not a tree expert. So even on the face, if it looks good, tree canker or I'm just not an expert, so I would be really laying on the recommendations of an arborist on this. So in addition to the 6-1, I would also say, and any that can be saved or have been determined to be in better condition.
Okay, Kathy, I don't know, you want to go, or David Burnett, one of the two of you? Go ahead, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think when I said that I would not relish the idea of looking at 470 trees, on a tour, I wasn't meaning that, that I wouldn't, but I'm trying to respect the Planning Commission, which will have the first bite of the apple. They need the tour, absolutely. And it concerns me that we have discussed so many important things tonight, and we don't have planning commissioners listening in. And how are they going to go back and make a decision about trees when they haven't even heard all this debate and all the learning that we've gone through just in this meeting alone? And so that does concern me a lot. And when I think it was Guido just said that they can make the decision and it's not appealable to the to the council, then I got really alarmed and I thought, whoa, how is that? How do we manage this process when we have no say in it and we've learned so much, and yet the responsibility for the decision isn't going to rest with us? And so I do have a lot of concerns about this. And I think that we have to honor, of course, the 6-1, but my goodness, we've already heard so many other plans from the developer and the city. We need to incorporate them. We can't just, stay with 6-1 because it's already been more than that. And so why would we reject what the good work has already been accomplished with additional remedies, additional supports for the trees in the future? It's my thoughts on it. Thank you.
Can I,
Go ahead.
can I clarify something? When we talk about our policy, it goes to the Planning Commission. They make the recommendation, and Guido talked about staff implements it. It can still be appealed to the city council.
Right. I was gonna point that out. Yeah.
And so what we're trying to do in this process, like any appeal, is to keep an appeal valid to the council. And we don't want to get council ahead in the process, going out there, looking at a site, giving their opinions, talking to planning commissioners, doing all that stuff, and the possibility that this is going to be could be appealed to them. And so that's kind of on the staff, and we're trying to keep the council available for an appeal. Council's role is they adopted the policy and said way back that Planning Commission is going to be making these decisions. We don't want these tree decisions coming to the council. If that's something that we want to revisit in our policy, we can certainly do that later on down the road. But this is our policy right now. The other point is our policy, our code right now is 6-1, and so we can't do anything on our end that is outside that 6-1, and so if there's an expectation, and the Dunes has already said that, and we're having those discussions to look at protecting those trees along First Avenue, that would all be in addition to the mitigation of the 6-1. Now, if there's an expectation for something different on the Dunes end, then again, that has to come back to the council anyway, because the council policy is 6-1 mitigation. And if we're doing anything different, that's going to come back to the council for a change. But at this point, it's 6-1. We're talking with the Dunes about protecting those trees along First Avenue that are in Phase 2 West. So I just wanted to clarify those points.
And Lane, what about their hiring and maintaining an arborist and in support of the SOPs and all of that? I mean, those are all part of it, correct?
Yes.
Beyond the 6-1.
Yes, the Dunes has already committed to us that that they'll fund additional staff that we need for an inspector or whatever to monitor that part of it. They've already committed. They're going to do their arborist.
Okay, I didn't
We
know
intend
that.
to clarify that in these SOPs that we're going to bring back to the council. And we're going to do that either way, because that was a learning thing through this process that we need to clarify that and be sure that council is very comfortable.
Great.
with
Okay,
that
well,
direction.
you just gave me some new information, but also if the decision of the planning commission is appealable to council, if the planning commission just say clear cut, then, and it's fine, just clear cut. The developer may not wish to challenge that or appeal it, right? And so again, the council would not be able to influence that decision. So that's a concern, right?
Anyone can appeal that decision. So
The council can, yeah, but
member of the public, someone that's on the former tree commission, there's other people that can appeal that decision.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. Let's go to Councilmember Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am interested in a tour of the trees. If you can obtain permission to access the trees, if we could plan out a couple of Saturdays or whenever you're available, I would accompany you to do as many as we possibly can. There's only, I believe there's less than 50 that are substantial, that are really big trees. So I think we could knock those out in a couple of days, just for my own edification. Because listening to this conversation, it hurts my head, the rationale and the discussion that's been put forward so far. I think your assessment of where we are and what we need to be concerned about, the tree canopy for the city of Marina, to me is of utmost importance. So I'll throw my hand up if you want to make the arrangements. I'd be happy to accompany you on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Let's go to Councilmember Lisa Berkeley. Muted, Lisa. It's okay,
Sorry.
you get a second shot. Now you got your practice. Now you're ready to go.
Right. I actually second what has been discussed about doing a walking tour. I definitely think that certainly the visual and the context will help all of us in our ongoing future policymaking, as well as understanding more specifically what we're working with right now. So, I mean, I've been out there and I've walked around, but I have not been on a full tour of all of the trees. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. So I don't expect that as a group, we're going to visit 100 trees or 478 trees. My expectation is that we would visit enough trees that have a little tag on them that says tree number 1497. And we would look up 5 or 7 trees. We'd look them up and we'd see what's going to happen to these trees and why. So we understand the process, not that we're going to get down into the weeds and be directing staff and developer on every single tree, but that we get it, that we understand what's at risk. We understand the pros and cons of removal and retention and relocation so that we don't have another meeting like tonight. This meeting results, in addition to the tour and all of us being much more educated and aware than we are tonight. So I'll just go ahead and make a substitute motion to start from scratch that we direct staff to come back at a reasonable time of their choosing to give us the compensation options to deal with the 7 trees that have been removed recently without permit. And that takes care of the past. And then in the future, there are 3 things. I'm hearing an echo here. Sorry about the echo. That we organize a site tour somehow to get planning commission and city council out on site with concerned members of the public and staff of both developer and city sides, so that they can learn together, but not be conversant in ways that would break we got to have some rules about conduct, but that we organize that site tour for those 2 bodies with the supporting staff and public, and that Guido at a reasonable time of his choosing comes back to us with his suggested SOPs that we can discuss. And lastly, that staff come back to us at a reasonable time of their choosing with their list of recommended changes to our side, and then just the FYI of the list of changes the developers are committed to making on their side, so that then we could have a discussion about, what are our next steps, or are we ready to just say yes to everything because we're satisfied? So that would be my substitute motion.
I second it.
Okay, so Mayor Pro Tem seconds it. Let's go to Councilmember Christina Medina Dirksen.
I'd like to ask that we make it a 6-1, only because that is what our policy is currently. And so long as the Planning Commission acts by a specific date, say end of May, so it doesn't hold up any work on the developer side.
Okay, so the compensation options are definitely going to include 6-1. I'm expecting there might be a combination of things that they're going to do. Maybe it's 6-1, maybe it's 3-1 plus retained trees. I have no idea, but 6-1 is definitely going to be one of the options because, as you said, that's the Bible. And then on the site tour right now, we heard tonight that the Planning Commission was expected to hear the tree removal permit for Phase 3 on May 26th. So
That's the tentative map, Mr. Mayor.
the tentative map and
Not the
not the tree removal permit. So Guido, is based on what I heard tonight, the tentative map even takes us down the road further, right? Once you have a tentative map saying you can build homes here and commercial here, and then we ask to keep some trees, we're going to hear, oh, but the tentative map's already been approved. Doesn't it make it a lot harder to retain trees after you approve the tentative map?
That is true, Mr. Mayor. I agree with that.
Just know that from experience. Oftentimes we want to make changes and say, oh, no, that tentative map, baby. Once that rolls, good luck. We can't reopen those can of worms. And so, I think this tour, I'm not sure, but Lane, you're our sage here. Can you give us some direction?
Yeah, we can definitely make the tour happen really quick. And the Dunes is indicated that they're very willing to do that. We would notice it as an open meeting to the public, so there wouldn't be any Brown Act violation. So Council, Planning Commission could come, the public also could attend. Would work with our attorney to make it very clear that this is just walking through, providing information, and there's no really discussion and we like this, we don't like this, these are criteria we like. It's strictly walk through, look at it. We'll probably provide the booklet ahead of time that has the trees, and so you can have all that information. And
that was my concern, Lane. It's just making sure how it's noticed and that it's an informational item, because still, once again, the council, in fairness to the applicant, it could be appealed back to them. So as long as we work with the city attorney.
Yeah, and I'm comfortable that we could, if the council wants to do it, I'm comfortable we can put a framework in that will work.
Okay.
All right. Christina Medina Dirksen, your hand is up. Did you have more input?
No, I'm fine with the substitute motion. Can we also throw in that they buy us all a copy of the Lorax? Just
Yeah, I want a copy of the Lorax signed by Don Hofer and the entire MCP team.
There you go.
Poor developers, they're out there to do a job, and they just don't get any love around this tree removal process. Okay, so let's have a roll call vote, please, Guido.
1 second. I've got mine. You caught me off guard there, Mr. Mayor. Sorry. Mayor Delgado.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Biala.
Yes.
Councilmember Dirksen.
That would be it.
Sorry, I apologize. Councilmember Berkeley. And Councilmember Burnett.
Yes.
And I don't think I heard from Councilmember Berkeley. So. You're muted. So.
I'm doing great today. Yes.
All right, thank you.
All right. Shout out to Don and your entire team, Don, Patrick, for being the arborist, and all the staff that have worked hard on this. I really appreciate that you responded to our comments and requests from weeks ago when you put together tonight's meeting. And I think that we're all a lot more educated tonight than we were when this meeting started. So thanks to everyone for your piece. Don, you want to have the last word? How are you feeling?
No, I feel, thank you for your time, guys. I'll be brief. I was long-winded before, but it feels like we're going in the right direction. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lane and Guido. You've been the heart of this process on our end. Appreciate that. Thanks to all the council members for your indulgence. It was a long meeting, but I think it was worth it. For the trees, it was worth it. Okay. All right. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.